Welcome, everybody, to the pre-show. We are getting things ready to go here. I'm getting my headphones on. I've just finished the podcast intro. I guess we can slide that over here now. Won't be needing that any longer. Oh, it's very bright on the screen. That's a little nicer. That's a little bit less nicer. Okay, let's pause the little video here. Hello, chat room. We need to pop out the chat room. I can't even see anybody. There we go. The chat needs to go to the right. This needs to go to the left. All right. I've got Stream Health. That looks good. Hey, everybody. Is there a way we can pay you to take classes? Well, you can watch my videos. That's pretty much it. I don't have any live classes or one-on-one or anything like that. So I do, unfortunately, just not enough time in the day, as it turns out, to be able to do all of this from one place for one person. Let's see what else we got going on here. Let's check recordings. Am I recording down here? Yep, you can see the Cylons going down here. We are recording up on my OBS. That looks great. Let's pot this down. We're looking pretty good here for the Network Plus study group. We'll get started here in about 8 minutes, where I have Network Plus questions and you can answer them online. We'll get them ready to go. If you're watching this on the YouTube, you can find us there. But we're also live on the website at professormesser.com/live. It's the same video and the same chat, just in a different place. You aren't missing anything, don't worry. But thanks for being here, everybody. Hope everybody. I have not done a live stream in weeks because of the weird schedule I had this month. So we did 2 at the beginning of the month, and then we are doing 2 at the end of the month. Like the whole middle of the month was just an empty thing there. Sorry about that. Normally I like to do one at least every week, but that didn't work out so well this month. But we'll figure it out. We'll get things going there with all of those pieces. That's the part to me that is the most challenging, is getting all of those things to do. Oh, and thanks for somebody who's taken advantage of the super chat. Thank you for that $5 donation. Ryuji Sakamoto. I appreciate that. Taking your Network Plus exam in an hour. Well, this is down to the wire, isn't it? So that's the part that will be the most fun, is running right into this and making it happen. This is a good get your mind in the right place kind of Q&A. Are you taking it online? Is that how that's working? Or are you going to a place? There's not a lot of places available quite yet. There's a few of them here and there, I've noticed. And different states have different rules and regulations, so it depends also on where you are in the world and what you're able to do with them. So that's the challenge, is sometimes it's knowing the content's the challenge, and then the second challenge is finding a place to take the exam. I think the online testing, I agree, Ernest, is very convenient. There are some idiosyncrasies with the testing interface that I'm hoping that they will get ready to fix or have fixed already. We'll have to see. But it's minor. It's relatively minor. You don't want any problems to occur when you're taking an exam, of course, but at least there is an option for the online piece of it. So that's the real key. We got about 5.5 minutes to go. You can see our countdown. We're heading up to 12 noon Eastern time here in Florida. So this is also a good study group. I think Network Plus is a good jumping off point for this. That's also, I think, really, really, really important. If you're trying to get into any part of IT, this is the right place to be. What else we got going on? Let's check our cameras. Cameras look good. I just got the laptop set up and ready. That looks good. I think we're from a pre-show perspective, and not having done this in 3 weeks, I feel like I've missed something. Yet it all works a little better. It's all working there just fine. So turn the audio up, the audio is pretty good. The audio stays exactly where it is. Audio levels on the output on the stream are fantastic, as a matter of fact. They are just below the red. They are in the yellow, right in the middle of the yellow. So audio is pretty much there. You're not going to get better audio than what's coming out of there. So if you're not hearing very well, turn it up on your side. Check the audio on the viewer, on the player that's in front of you. Make sure the player audio is turned up, because everything looks really, really good with audio going out of here. And I don't want to change any of that. The last thing you want to do at this point is turn a button, turn a dial, is modify the output of the audio, and then it all sounds like and nobody likes that. That's just the worst live stream ever. So we won't be touching anything. Right now, I think we're okay. The problem, of course, is since it's been a number of weeks, I never know. I was mentioning in the chat room on my website earlier, as I turned on my streaming server, normally right after a stream, everything gets unplugged. So I'm in Florida. We have horrible storms, thunderstorms. So whenever I'm not using a computer, it gets unplugged, physically disconnected. I disconnect the power. I disconnect the network. I disconnect anything that would be coming into that device that any electrical conduit would be able to take advantage of. So everything gets unplugged. So on the back of my streaming server, I unplug the power, I unplug the network, and I unplug the power that goes to, there's a converter box that converts between the HDMI and the SDI that I use. And I plugged it all in today. I hit the go button, the power button on the front of the server. Nothing. Nothing at all. Just completely black. We start in 3 minutes. 3 minutes until we get going. 3 minutes, Mr. Sinatra. And I looked at the back. It's plugged in solidly. I followed it all the way up to where it's plugged in. It's plugged into a power outlet that has a light on it. The light is there. It's getting power. I haven't done any testing with a multimeter yet. 5 minutes have gone by now. I go back to the front of the server. I hit the power button again, as if hitting it a second time will somehow change the laws of physics that caused it not to work the first time. And of course, hitting it the second time did nothing. It just sat there completely dark. Well, what happened, finally went around to the back, unplugged it, and then noticed that at some point where I'd either unplugged it or plugged it back in, I hit the switch on the power supply. So of course it wasn't getting any power. Plugged it back in, hit the switch, we're up and running. That was my biggest troubleshooting. It took me 5 minutes. Now, I had not had coffee yet, so I'm using that as an excuse. But it's the number one thing. Is it plugged in yet? Is you got a connection there? Does it have power? And of course, it was that one. That's pretty much how things go. We got 2 minutes, less than 2 minutes to go for this. Can you tell us more about the Messer law? I'm not aware of any specific Messer laws. I can see it the first time though. There's no laws. So we have coffee. Here's our coffee. Got it. We are ready to go for the after show. So we're fine there. No problem. One of the challenges that we're going to have today is just me remembering where the buttons are. It seems unusual for that to happen. We will show the face. Do not worry. You can see I'm up here. There's the preview. Do not worry. We haven't started yet. We have 1 minute before we get started. This is the pre-show. This is where you get, it's not like this the whole time. You will actually see me on the screen once we get things going. Do not worry. This is like the worst show ever. It's the back of a guy's head. Nope, it's better than that. You won't be seeing that until the after show. Don't worry. I probably need to dust in here though. You don't. During this time though, we have been shooting video. There's been a lot going on here, but that's one of the challenges is just remembering where everything goes. Because when I'm shooting video for my presentations for the right now Security Plus, it's a very different setup. Where everything is pretty much the same, but connecting things, the mic and the things that we have here, you can learn all about the studio. Go to professormesser.com/studio and you'll see all those things for all the specifics. Well, it is top of the hour. Let's get the presentation up on this screen, and then we can get started on that screen. Let's see if we get a green light. Green light means play. Very nice. All right, everybody, let's do a live stream. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 2021 Professor Messer Network Plus study group. This is for the Network Plus N10007 study group. We'll talk in a moment about the differences between the different versions and the things that we'll be seeing today. But this is a study group where in this first hour, I will ask you questions that come directly from the Network Plus exam objectives. In the second hour, I'll open up the phone lines. So instead of me asking questions, that second hour, you get to ask me questions. We'll also take questions from the chat room. We'll talk more about what is going on with the Network Plus exam. We can talk about anything related to technology or even things not related to technology. It's a completely open set of phone lines in the second hour, and you're welcome to ask anything you would like. Not sure I would answer anything in there, but we'll find out. The second hour is always a mystery, so we never know what's going to happen there. If you'd like to participate in this first hour and you're here watching this live, just open up a new browser window. Go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA. That is the question and answer page. There's actually a question waiting for you right there. So try to click over there. There's also an app you can get for this, of course. The app is the Socrative Student app. That's what you want to search for. That Socrative Student app will ask you for a room name. That room name is Professor Messer, all one word, ProfessorMesser. Make sure you spell it right, or there will not be a question waiting for you. If you do all of that, get the app, you go to that page, you type in everything it asks you to type in, you will see a question waiting for you. And that question asks, a system administrator is using SNMP. Which of the following would be the most likely use of this protocol? Would it be to view router statistics? Would it be to transfer log files? Would it be to encrypt all data between remote sites? Would it be to restore from a backup? Or would it be to view the desktop of a remote device? Now, if this question seems familiar and you were here last month, then you're correct. It's a question we had from last month's study group. This is our rewind question so that you can get in to see if you're able to answer questions, if you're able to access the questions properly. This gets all the bugs out. See if you know what the answer to this is. We will come back to this question in just a moment. Thanks for being here. We could not do these study groups without you. I guess we could, but it'd just be me, and I already know the answers. So it's nice that you're here. We're able to participate live, or if watching this on the replay, you can go through this on the replay and get your Q&A from that. Of course, we're making all kinds of videos throughout the month. You can always get updated on when the latest video is being uploaded by going to YouTube and subscribing at youtube.com, or to go to professormesser.com/YouTube. Either way will get you to where you need to find us. There are also pop quiz questions for Network Plus. There is a weekly pop quiz question that I post on Twitter, usually on a Tuesday. You'll find that at professormesser.com/Twitter. And of course, you can get the same question with a pretty picture over on Instagram, professormesser.com/Instagram. Let's talk about Network Plus. The current version of the Network Plus exam is the N10007. This was an exam that was released on March the 1st, 2018. So for those of you familiar with the cycle that CompTIA uses, they usually introduce a new exam 3 years later. Well, now we are in March of 2021. It is 3 years later, but there is not a new exam. What could have happened in the last year that would have delayed things? I don't know. But for some reason, it has been pushed a little bit this year. We have been pushed a little bit later than having this come out in March. We should expect to see the new exam, the N10008. I expect we will see that released in September of 2021. That was a date that was thrown out at the end of last year by CompTIA. So we happen to know when we think a new version is. So that means if you are watching this and you are thinking, maybe I should wait, that's an awful idea. It's not going to be out until September. Even when it is released in September, it takes a while for study materials to be made available. And the N10007, according to what we have been told, if we do the math, 6 months after release would be in March of 2022. So a year from now, at a minimum, we would expect the current N10007 be retired. Although I have seen that there was a posting on Reddit from someone who talked to support at CompTIA, and they say the N10007 is going to be around 3 extra months. This is similar to what they did for Security Plus, by the way. June 15th, 2022 has been thrown around. So this current version of the exam is going to be around for at least a year, perhaps even more. The moral of this story is this is the information you need to be studying here in March of 2021. This is exactly what you need to be working on. Do not wait. Do not delay yourself. Do not say that you're going to wait and take the newer exam. It gains you nothing because you don't get a newer certification. You get exactly the same certification. And more importantly, if you take the exam now and pass it, you're Network Plus certified. You don't have to wait to be certified. You have that in your pocket. You can use that to get a job today rather than waiting to sometime later in the year. Doesn't even make sense. So we should expect that newer exam to be out in September. And of course, we will have a new version of our training course available at that point, all of the things that you would be accustomed to seeing. On the N10007, though, because we know nothing about the N10008 yet, the N10007, though, is 90 minutes long, a maximum of 90 questions. So there's a lot of information you have to get through in a very short period of time. And you have to score 720 on a scale from 100 to 900. So that's what you should be thinking about if you're planning to take that Network Plus certification. Also want to let you know that I have all of my Network Plus videos are available for you to watch online for free right now. There's no registration. There's no paywall. You simply go online, you watch the videos. You don't even have to tell me you're watching them. You can go to YouTube and watch them all day, every day. There are also, though, offline versions of these videos that you can get, and they're in my Success Bundle. You can get video downloads, audio MP3 files. This comes with my Network Plus course notes, which we'll look at later on in the study group. And it also includes other exclusives like my Exam Hacks ebook. If you want to know more about this, it's on my website. Go to ProfessorMesser.com/netsuccess. We also have a video download or a video version replay of this study group available immediately afterwards. You can, of course, go to ProfessorMesser.com/podcast to get the audio version of this replay. So you've got two choices. If you like the video, you can go to YouTube or go to my website. If you want the audio, you can use your podcast listening program to automatically download it. So no matter where you happen to be, you can simply start your podcast app, hit play, and you've got the latest study group all available to you. If you are watching this on YouTube, you wait about a day. My marketing manager, Lori, goes back through these, listens to the whole thing, and writes down timestamps for everything that we do. Hi, Lori. She's watching the replay. Everybody say hi to Lori. She is watching the live stream and the live text go by on the replay as well. So all the chat is there for her to see. This is one of those things that makes it very nice later on if you want to skip around to a particular question or a particular answer. This makes it very easy to do. So it's nice to have those timestamps available. It becomes very, very useful. You can go back years to look at those timestamps. Let's go back to that question we asked earlier, which was a system administrator is using SNMP. Which of the following would be the most likely use of this protocol? Would it be to view router statistics, transfer log files, encrypt all data between remote sites, restore from a backup, or view the desktop of a remote device? Let's see how you answered this one. 70% of you, 70, said view router statistics. That's a pretty good majority. 15% of you said transfer log files. 9% said encrypt all data between remote sites. 6% said view the desktop of a remote device. And 1% said restore from backup. Well, that's 70% of you that said view router statistics. That's exactly what SNMP is commonly used to do. It's to gather stats from some of these infrastructure devices like routers, servers, switches, firewalls. All of these devices tend to talk SNMP. And we can communicate to that device through an SNMP management console. This is a nice one here with the CRT display. I intentionally did that. It's talking back and forth to a router that's up here. So it's asking things like how many bytes have gone in and out of a particular interface, and the device will respond back with a numeric value saying this is how many bytes. And then this management server, this SNMP server, can then decide what it would like to do with that SNMP client. If I want to be more specific. There's also different versions of SNMP that are available. You should certainly be knowledgeable of the different versions and what they do. It has a big impact on understanding what versions of SNMP are insecure, meaning that they are transmitted through the network with no encryption, and which versions are secure, which include encryption as part of their methodology. Version 3 is the one that has that extra piece, that extra encryption there to be able to have that. So that's one that you should be familiar with. And of course, if you did answer A, view router statistics, you got that one absolutely right. That is the right answer. Or perhaps you were here last month and you remember what we talked about last month before doing all of those. So either way, you're in good shape. You know exactly what you need to know regarding SNMP, and that's one of those statistics or one of those protocols that you will absolutely need to know about when you are ready to take your exam. Comes directly from your exam objectives. There are, of course, new questions we're going to do for the rest of this study group. We're going to start, though, with a performance-based question. For those of you that haven't taken a CompTIA exam before, the first set of questions you get on the exam are not multiple choice-based questions. This was a multiple choice-based question where there was a question and there were multiple answers to choose from. So even if you guessed, you could possibly get it right. You had a 20% chance in this case of getting this question right, even if you had no idea. But CompTIA gives you a handful of questions at the beginning where you don't get the option of picking from an available set of answers. You have to answer these yourself. And we have a performance-based question for you. The very first new question of every study group is a performance-based question. So if you'd like some other examples of these, you can always go back through the last year of study groups to have a look at those. Let's do one, though, today. This performance-based question, for those IP-related people out there, you're trying to figure out the IP of everything, this is a TCP IP question, and it asks, what classes are associated with these IP addresses? And I have 5 IP addresses here, and I want you to tell me what the IP classes are, I guess the default class for these particular IP addresses. So for those of you listening in on the podcast side, I'm going to go through all 5 of the addresses, and you in your mind can write down what you think they are. So the first is 226.15.0.2. The second address is 144.7.254.25. The third is 125.199.232.240. The fourth is 199.23.121.1. And the last one is 222.126.191.223. Those are 5 lots of numbered IP addresses, IPv4, fortunately. I didn't have to go through and tell you what the IPv6 addresses were. I intentionally did not do that. For those listening in again, we'll go through all 5 very quickly. 226.15.0.2, 144.7.254.25, 125.199.232.240, 199.23.121.1, and lastly, 222.126.191.223. There's a lot of dots there. So I'd like you to go through each one of those, and for each address, tell me what that class happens to be. That's what I'm looking for. So if you think they're all class A, you can type in A. That's your answer for that. So all of those, I think, can help as you're stepping through trying to figure these out. As someone mentioned in the chat earlier in the pre-show, is that there's a lot of questions you will run into relating IP addressing, and it's not all subnetting. In fact, you'll probably get very little subnetting on the actual exam because subnetting isn't a very big part of the exam objectives. But you'll probably get other questions relating to IP as well, and this may be one of those that you will find related to TCP/IP. If you think you know the answer, go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA, lock in your answer there. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room as well. So let's go through each one of these, and then we're going to figure out how to answer this question if it shows up on your exam itself. So we asked what classes are associated with these IP addresses. And we're going to step through. I've got to step through all of these. Let's see if I'm able to do this. This next one, first one on our list, 226.15.0.2 is a Class D address. And again, I'll show you how we got that Class D in just a moment so we can figure out the details of this. There's a pretty easy hint, pretty easy thing you can do to be able to figure this out. Second on our list was 144.7.254.25. That's a Class B. The real key with this one is that very first part of the address, that first octet of the address. So the first octet of 226 means that it's Class D. First octet of 144 means it's Class B. So if we know what the first octet 125, what class is that? That's a Class A. That's a Class A. Now, the part of this that might help, if you already know how to do the binary translation of these, you can convert all into binary. It might help you as well, but I'll show you another hint that might help as we go through this. The next, the fourth on our list starts with a 199. A 199 is Class C. That's a Class C address. And lastly, 222. An IP address starting with 222 is also a Class C address. These are the starting points. Obviously, as I mentioned in my training course, we don't use class-based subnetting any longer. It used to be that you didn't have to assign a subnet mask. You would simply look at that first octet, and the machine would automatically assign a subnet mask based on that first octet. But these days, of course, we don't work that way. Your subnet mask can be a combination of many different things, usually configured by your network administrator. But there is a chart, it's part of my video and part of my course notes, that has all of the different classes that you'll run into, an A, B, C. You might run into Class D if you're dealing with multicast, and you probably won't run into Class E because anything in that range is a reserved IP address that will not be on your network. They're reserved and you won't see them. Class A means that if you were to look at that first octet and the first set of bits, if you converted that to binary, if the first bit is a 0, which means that this IP address, this first octet, is between the range of 1 and 127, or I guess that's one you would run into. If it's between 1 and 127, it's a Class A. If it's between 128 and 191, it's a Class B. If it's between 192 and 223, it's a Class C. And if it's between 224 and 239, it's a Class D. So we were just looked at the first octet of each of these. If it's a 226, it's in that Class D range. A 144, it's in a Class B range, etc. So if you know those different endpoints, 1 to 127, 128 to 191, 192 to 223, and of course I realize what the 127 .0.0.0/8 is a loopback address, but I stuck it in here in Class A just because technically speaking, your loopback address is a Class A. So those are the important things. If you know nothing else about this chart, those are the two things you need to know, the class and the leading bits. Those are the important parts. If you know that, you'll be able to answer this question. You'll be able to go back and know what the starting point is or the class of any one of these. The reason this is important today, because I mentioned we don't use class-based subnetting any longer, the reason it's important now is because it's a starting point when you start subnetting. So you have to start somewhere, and starting with the default class is the starting point that you can then use to even subnet further down the line. That's why it's still important to know what these classes happen to be. If you also took this on your actual exam, you could get some of these right, and you could get some of these wrong. CompTIA has told us in their frequently asked questions on their website that they could possibly assign partial credit for questions like this. But they also say, we might not give you partial credit as well. So we never know exactly how this will work when they finally do the grading. They don't share that information. They don't tell you how many points you get for a particular question. We have no idea. But for a question like this, it certainly lends itself to be something like a partial credit. I guess we can just hope that it does turn into partial credit, but we don't have a way to control that. The best thing you can do is to just try to work hard to make sure everything that you're answering is correct. And at the end, we just hope the numbers work out. There's really no other way to do it than that. Well, that's your performance-based question for the month. It's very common to see matching questions, fill in the blank, questions that do other things as well. That is where we will focus, at least from our perspective, on the rest of what we're doing with this. This is where I want to focus, is on the next question. We'll go back to some multiple choice questions. And this question is one asking about a WAN link? The question asks, a remote office WAN link is a single connection communicating at 1.544 megabits per second. Which of the following would describe this network type? Would it be OC48, POTS, Metro E, T1, or cable broadband? A remote office WAN link is a single connection communicating at 1.544 megabits per second. Which of the following would describe this network type? Would it be OC48, POTS, Metro E, T1, or cable broadband? Now, it sounds like I might have made up some of those, but I did not. Those are all 5 real things that hopefully you'll be able to parse through. Knowing the different connections and their speeds, it's something you should just know as second nature once you start becoming more involved in networking. But as you're learning this is one of those that you do have to memorize, especially if you've never seen these types of connections before. But understanding what is fast and what is slow is going to help you if you're in a meeting and they say, well, we've got this application, it's connected to a remote site over the WAN, and it's running at 1.544 megabits per second. And you need to understand what that means. And how that might affect other things that you're doing with these applications. In fact, they may ask you, should we upgrade this? If so, what do we upgrade to? Well, now we have a whole nother set of questions that need to be answered. And knowing these, what we call feeds and speeds, is an important part of this. You need to be able to make decisions about why you're putting in a particular network connection type, what type of throughput you would expect to find, and in many cases, what the cost of that is going to be. There's always pluses and minuses. And when it finally gets down to it, it does sort of mean that the cost of this is going to be in consideration. It almost always is in being able to do that. Let's see how you did with this question. It asked, a remote office WAN link is a single connection communicating at 1.544 megabits per second. Which of the following would describe this network type? Would it be OC48? Would it be POTS? Would it be Metro E? Would it be T1? Or would it be cable broadband? If we look at the results, 63% of you said it's a T1. That's the one you would need to work through. That's a pretty good number, 62%, considering the next highest number is 17% for cable broadband, 15% for POTS, which stands for the plain old telephone system. Not making that up. That's a real thing. We got 3% for Metro E and 2% for OC48. These are things that you'll run into with wide area networks, especially one of the things you often find in networking, by the way, is we install these network connections and they just sit there. They just sit on the network and they don't do anything. They are always there. They don't, if you're ever working through these, it's very unusual to change very quickly once, especially a wide area network connection is in. So you tend to plug these in, and they are just always there until you finally come back many years later to either upgrade or change these connections. If you want to see a difference between T1 and T3, there's also E1 and E3, because in the U.S. and elsewhere, we can never all come up with the standard way of doing things around the world. There's always differences depending on different countries and what you would find. North America does things one way, Europe does things another way, South America does things another way, Latin America does things. Depending on where you are in the world, there will be a different set of standards associated with that. In the world of North America and Europe, you tend to see a lot of T1 and E1 or T3, E3 as those sets of standards. They're sort of older standards at this point. But this is one where you do need to understand these. Knowing the broad numbers is really the most important part. You will very commonly see these written out with these multiple details. Like T1 is a 1.544 megabits per second. We can't just say 1.5 megabits per second. But that's usually when we're talking to other network professionals. We often will say, yeah, that's 1.5 megabit. T3 is a bundle of those, 28 of them. And if you do the math, there's a little bit of overhead associated with, but it finally ultimately comes out on a line rate of 44.736 megabits per second. Now, if you think about this, that's not a lot of speed. These are older technologies. This was back before we had Metro Ethernet at 100 megabits per second. It's well before we had connections where we could plug in our computers at 1 gig or even 10 gig connectivity. These are obviously much, 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 much lower than that. And very commonly, we don't see manufacturers or network providers even allowing us to buy these services any longer. There are other better, less expensive, and really much more efficient services available. So you probably won't see a new T1 or T3 being installed, but you may be removing or replacing existing T1 or T3. And if that happens to be the case, there will probably be migration where you're moving to a cable broadband, you're moving to a Metro E, you're moving to an MPLS, you're moving to an SD-WAN, you're moving to some other type of wide area network connectivity that gives you a little more flexibility, a lot more functionality, and probably less cost, because we found much more efficient ways to do things these days than using T1, T3 type technologies. Whenever we are trying to find them, though, you will find them running 1.544 megabits per second. If you did answer D, T1, that is the right answer. The 65% of you that chose, yeah, that's a T1. I know that speed. You got that one absolutely right. Well done. Let's do another multiple choice question. Yes, by the way, for those of you asking, I mentioned this, is that if you do the math, you multiply by 28, this doesn't quite match up. You get a little bit less than what's there. There is a little bit of overhead associated with that. It's not a complete multiply by 28 to have that happen, but that's the number we use as the standard line rate for those. So you'll see that if you ever see anybody say, well, it's 40 megabits per second, it's 45 meg. We often say 45 when we talk about T3. We just sort of round everything up and be able to work through those. On your exam, don't worry. They're not going to say, is it 44.736 or is it 44.737? They're not going to ask you that. You're not going to have to worry about that. Knowing the broad speeds and feeds for this is going to be just fine for you. Let's do another question. Let's move away from T1 and T3 and get into a situation where we're dealing with redundancy. This question asks, a remote site has been having power outages that can last up to 24 hours. Which of the following would provide the best power redundancy option? Would that be a battery-backed UPS, dual power supplies, low voltage CPU, laptop inverters, or a generator? A remote site has been having power outages that can last up to 24 hours. Which of the following would provide the best power redundancy option? Would that be a battery-backed UPS, dual power supplies, a low-voltage CPU, a laptop inverter, or a generator? If you think you know the answer, no answers in the chat room. You want to go to that link that's on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. See if you happen to know what this one is. Knowing what the options are for redundancy and being able to keep things up and running are incredibly important for really any part of IT, but especially when you get into networking and security, because you have to make sure everything continues to run. And that's the thing that's always mentioned. Whenever something is not working, what people will always say is that the network is down. It may have nothing to do with the network. People who are network professionals are always very sensitive to this sometimes, and you need to have a thick skin if you're going into networking, because the network is the first place they blame. Probably because the network is the thing you can't see. I can see an application, I can see what's on my local computer, but the network is just a mystery to so many people that if something goes wrong, it's got to be the thing that we don't know about. So it's got to be the network. So don't worry if you're in that particular situation and people are complaining that the network is a problem. Do not worry. They don't mean anything personal, and they're not attacking your network. They're just saying it's broken. The internet is down. The internet is broken. That is the important part for you. And also, it's very useful if you're in the networking team that you have a good working relationship with the server team, with the workstation team, with the Linux folks. You're able to work together to solve these performance problems. Very often, although it may not be the network that is the problem, the network team often has the tools, technology, and the knowledge to be able to solve or at least identify where the problem does happen to be. So that's one of those situations you'll run into. I'm sort of speaking to you as an ex-network administrator and the things that have had to go through the years, and that's just one that you might run into. Let's see how we do with this question. The question asked, a remote site has been having power outages that can last up to 24 hours. Which of the following would provide the best power redundancy option? Is it a battery-backed UPS, dual power supplies, a low-voltage CPU, a laptop inverter, or a generator? We can see that 75% of you said a generator, but we have 23% of you that say that, oh, it's a battery-backed UPS. That's what you would use to have all of those things there. This is one of those where you do have to know what these technologies are, but you also have to know what these technologies and how they can be implemented. It's more than just understanding what an acronym is or understanding what a definition of this is. We need some way to be able to understand how to implement this technology. And in this case, we've really got two of these answers are the highest. 75% said a generator, 23% said battery-backed UPS. Only 2% said dual power supplies, and nobody said dual voltage CPUs or laptop inverters. So let's talk about why, in this case, 75% of you said generator. Is that what you would run into? Is that what you would perhaps use? And in this particular question, a generator really is the right answer. These are the ones that you would run into. We really refer to generators as long-term power backup. I am located in Florida. We have hurricanes that come through. They will knock out power for a week. So in those particular cases, you need to have some way to power things over the long term. I think a long term is like a day. You need to be able to power for very long periods of time. And there have been cases, especially in Florida, where we've had to have generators running for months before we ever got power brought back to some of these. Powering an entire building's relatively easy if you have the right setup, the right configuration for these generators. You obviously need some way to power the generator, though. So often the generators might be connected to a source such as a diesel or gas type, some type of petrol, or in the case if it's a smaller generator or smaller facility, it might be natural gas. There are a lot of organizations or a lot of municipalities. The natural gas is it's not in the air, it's in the ground. So when you have a storm come through, well, it didn't break the ground often. So usually we'll have some natural gas available. So it's great to be able to have that there. The problem, though, is getting this power turned on. If you've ever worked with a generator before, it has to start up. So it's starting up. It's an engine that is starting up. You are powering on the engine. What usually happens is the power goes out. The generator waits a certain amount of time, usually 15 to 20 seconds, after which time you will have those suddenly kick in. It'll suddenly decide, well, it's not coming back on. Let's start up the generator, and then it takes over. And later on, you can, of course, go back and once the power comes back on, it recognizes the power is back on. It waits to make sure the power stays back on. See, it's been through this before. And then finally, turns off and gets you back onto the standard power. There's usually a relay that switches between your generated power and the power coming from the power company. Generators would be the right source here. A battery-backed UPS, 23% of you chose battery-backed UPS. The problem, though, on these UPSs that are battery-backed is they have a limited amount of time that they will keep things up and running. So the battery that's in my studio here, I've got a couple of UPS, an uninterruptible power supply. That uninterruptible power supply interrupts itself after about 30 minutes, and then it's gone. You're done. Not going to be a situation where that's going to be able to keep up with a 24-hour requirement. And so that's why in this case, a battery-backed UPS, great for an hour maybe. In some cases, there's some battery setups that we have in my city that will keep for the cable company and the cellular phone companies. That central office can usually stay up and running about 5 hours. And then as soon as the batteries give out, you lose everything. So it's great. The power goes out and you're thinking, no problem. I'm on my phone. I'm connected to 5G. I can at least do something on here while the power is out. Until about 5 hours goes by, and then suddenly the CO powers off. And then you don't have any mobile phone coverage either. So if you have more batteries, you could stay up and running. What if you had 24 UPSs? Yes, you could. Not very practical. That is certainly not the best power redundancy option, a very expensive power redundancy option. But yeah, if you had more than one UPS, you could certainly do that. Just not very practical to keep everything up and running. The best answer here, a generator. 76% of you chose that one. That is the right answer. Let's do another one. Another question. This is multiple choice question that asks, which of the following would be the best way to prevent a rogue STP advertisement? Would it be DHCP snooping, root guard, auto negotiation, IP filter, or flood guard? Which of the following would be the best way to prevent a rogue STP advertisement? Would it be DHCP snooping, root guard, auto negotiation, IP filter, or flood guard? If you think you know the answer, please no answer in the chat room. You want to go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you know. First, you have to know what a rogue STP advertisement is. That's the part where I mentioned you have to know what these technologies are and what they do. That's the first part of this. The second part of this is, now that you know what a rogue STP advertisement is, now how do you prevent it? That's the challenge, is knowing the differences and how all of those can be prevented. There's a whole section of Network Plus that does talk about security. It talks about these types of things and being able to work through them. This is one that might help you as well, and being able to figure out the details of all of this. This is one, by the way, that can really be useful if you are working through setting up and trying to protect your network. You need to know what some of these technologies are. And all of these technologies I've listed are technologies that you might use to be able to set up your routed network, your switch network, your connectivity for users. So you do need to understand all of those and being able to work through them. See if you know what this one is. Lock in your answer at ProfessorMesser.com/QA. I'm watching you lock yours in right now. No Googling. I can tell when you're Googling because it takes a little bit longer to be able to work through these and know what the answer is, because then you have to open up Google. Of course, during your exam, you have no Google. So do not do that to yourself. Take a stab at it. See if you can work through what the differences are. Do some calculatus eliminatus. Just get rid of the things you know it isn't, and then you can work through this and figuring out the details. We'll talk more about STP advertisements in just a moment. Let's see how you did with this question, which asked, which of the following would be the best way to prevent a rogue STP advertisement? Would that be DHCP snooping? Would it be root guard? Would it be auto negotiation? Would it be IP filtering? Or would it be flood guard? How did you answer? 40% of you, 40, said root guard. 28% of you said flood guard. Some guarding going on. 20% said IP filtering. That's how you would do that. 7% said DHCP snooping, and 7% said auto negotiation. So that is one that I think we need to drill down into, because we really did not get we didn't get a majority at all, and we didn't get a strong plurality either. 39% root guard was the highest number in here. If we go with that 39%, then we would have gotten that one right. It is root guard. First, we have to know STP, the spanning tree protocol, is what we are dealing with here. For those of you that have worked with switch networks before, you know how easy it is to create a loop on that network and effectively bring everything down. So that's really the problem. If you're ever working through this and you're plugging in switches to each other and creating a loop, that can very, very quickly, in a matter of seconds, be able to bring down everything that is on your network. It will bring the network to its knees. It effectively stops everything from working. And that's not what you want, obviously. So to prevent those types of loops on your switch network, you would use spanning tree protocol. That is the protocol that keeps everything running on your network. And even if you connect it up so there was a loop, it would prevent a loop from occurring. It would stop that. It will block it within the software of the switch to prevent any of those loops from occurring. One of the things that is used by Spanning Tree is there are messages sent back and forth between these switches that keep all of the switches up to date with what's going on the network. They are able to communicate to each other. They send hello messages. They send configuration data. There's so much that it does, but it requires that all of these switches are constantly talking to each other. And it's really important whenever you start turning on switches and bringing up these devices, there has to be somebody in charge. There has to be a switch that is effectively the one that is the root bridge, we call it. Switching is effectively a newer flavor of bridging. Whenever you hear the term bridge, you should always think of switching. Whenever you hear switching, you should always think of bridging. They are exactly the same thing, just a different word that we use to describe this. Root guard is there because there can be cases where someone might plug in a device to the network and try to become the root of this STP configuration. And this root configuration is very important. There's a design of the network that the network administrator has created that relies on that root bridge being a certain device that has a certain value for its priorities. So we need to make sure that nobody takes that this rootness away from us. One of the ways that we can do that is to use some type of guard. Root guard is a very common term that's used on these switches. Different switch manufacturers use different names for this, but root guard is a very common term to use there so that we can allow the Spanning Tree Protocol Bridge Protocol Data Units, BPDUs. Those are the administrative messages sent back and forth between all of these switches, but we want to be sure that it can still talk, but no one else shows up later on and goes, I know you guys are talking, but I'm going to be the root bridge now. To prevent that from happening, we're going to tell all of our switches where the root bridge is, and we're going to keep listening for any other type of root changes, and we will disable interfaces to devices that try to take over or try to become the root of the Spanning Tree network. So that is what we were looking for to be able to block or to prevent some of these things from happening. That's exactly where you should go with this too, is looking at through all this list and determining how can I stop a rogue advertisement on my Spanning Tree network. And if we go through this list, you can see, of course, we did 39% of you did choose root guard. 27% of you chose flood guard. Flood guard, a very useful technology. It's one that is built into many switches, but it's designed to prevent broadcasts or large numbers of packets from being sent over these networks all at one time. The flood guard is there to prevent lots of communication being sent through one or different ports on that switch configuration, but not necessarily has anything to do with a rogue Spanning Tree. Flood guard blocks all flooding, regardless of the type of protocol that it happens to be on there. It's not something specific to Spanning Tree Protocol or preventing any rogue Spanning Tree Protocol advertisements. 20% of you said an IP filter. And what's interesting about this one, we would think IP filters would be very easy to set up. We could have IP filters here that could block almost anything, except Spanning Tree communication doesn't use IP. It uses simple MAC layer communication. In fact, it uses BPDUs, Bridge Protocol Data Units. There are no IP addresses associated with Spanning Tree because Spanning Tree works regardless of whatever you're using as a layer 3 protocol on this network. Spanning Tree is a layer 2 protocol. There are no IP addresses associated with Spanning Tree. So it would not be IP filter. 8% of you said DHCP snooping. The dynamic host configuration protocol is used to automatically assign IP addresses to devices. That's, of course, something we do want to make sure is working properly. If someone was to plug in a rogue DHCP server onto the network, then DHCP snooping would block that. DHCP snooping will not block a rogue STP advertisement. And then 6% of you said auto negotiation. That's the process that is used whenever you plug in a device to be able to determine what speed it should be using and what duplex it should be using. Auto negotiation not used to block rogue STP advertisements. The only answer here, the only one that makes any sense, is answer B, root guard. 40% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done. I think that was a pretty good number. Even though we didn't get a majority, I think we got pretty close to 50%. And that's a pretty good number. At least the question is one where we can at least step through these and maybe learn something after the fact. If you didn't get it right, that's okay too. This would be the time to get a question wrong, not during your exam. And in fact, for those of you that got a question wrong, you actually learned a little bit more than the people that got the question right, because now you know about STP advertisements, you know about the rogues, you know about keeping that root guard. That is what you should focus on, and that's what you should do on your exam if you're asked anything about rogue STP. All of this information we've gone through today already is very broad. You can tell Network Plus covers a lot of different topics dealing with IP addresses and security and configuration of equipment and topologies and the type of connectors. There's so much in Network Plus, so much that's in there. One of the things that I do is, of course, have all of my videos available for those of you, for example, that want to know more about Rogue STP and you want to know about RootGuard. There's a video that talks about all those things. But there's a lot of content. There's 101 Network Plus videos in this entire course, over 12 hours of content if you wanted to watch all of it. That's a little bit much, I think. That's a lot to go through, and not everybody has time to go through all of that. So I've taken everything from those videos and I put them into a single document. And this is my NTEN 007 course notes. I've taken all the important charts, all the important diagrams, all of the text. I put it into one set of notes. Here is the course notes PDF that I have on my screen right here. Let's step through a few pages of it. I, of course, give you a table of contents, and it's all clickable, of course. If you wanted to go right to Rogue Access Points, you can click there, and it goes right to that section in the course notes. You can see there's diagrams here, the DNS poisoning, the spoofing diagrams, all of the text from the videos is in here. Try to put everything into one single place. This is delivered as a PDF. You can purchase it right now and download it immediately. This is something you can also get a hard copy version. Here's the hard copy. See, it comes in a printed version made from dead trees. But this is one that I created because Mrs. Professor Messer says she likes a book, a hard copy, colored, very high quality type of paper book to be able to read through, that it's easier for her to do that than to be online. So we have both available. If you purchase the hard copy version, I give you the digital version for free. You can download it immediately once you purchase. So while you're waiting on this to be delivered in your mailbox, your physical mailbox, you can, of course, download and get the version of it there. It is only available on the Professor Messer website. It is not available on Amazon. You can go to professormesser.com/NPCN. It stands for Network Plus Course Notes. So that is one that will get you to all of those notes. Everything that I have available for Network Plus, it's in that document. Hopefully it's something that can help you too as you're planning for this exam. It's a good summary after the fact. You've already gone through the videos. You've read your book. Now here's a reference that you can use before walking into that exam just to make sure you've really got all of those topics. And every topic from the exam objective is in the course notes. That's by design. So that's an important example and something you should consider. You can find out more information at professormesser.com/NPCN. And thank you for those of you that have purchased it already in the chat room. Some of you have mentioned it. You've mentioned, yes, I've got this. It's great. Thank you so much for your support. It really does go a long way to keeping the lights on and making sure this crazy experiment continues to run. If you are in a different country, I do ship internationally. There are, of course, time constraints associated with that, and it does cost a little bit more, but you can just plug in your address and it will calculate all of that information during checkout. For those of you asking if I accept Bitcoin, I do. Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, PayPal, and credit card. It's all available during checkout. You'll see the options for all of those. The Bitcoin Cash is going to save you a little money on transactions anyway, but if you just like to use Bitcoin, that's an option as well for all of those. Thank you for your ongoing support with that, by the way. It really does go a long way, and we do appreciate it. Let's do some more Q&A. The next question, a user is not able to log in to an Active Directory network. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this issue? Would it be a duplex mismatch? Would it be an incorrect date and time? Would it be that DHCP is enabled? Would it be that STP is configured? or would it be that USB interfaces are disabled? A user is not able to log in to an Active Directory network. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this issue? Is it a duplex mismatch? Is it an incorrect date and time? Is it DHCP is enabled? Is it that STP is configured? Or is it that USB interfaces are disabled? If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. You want to go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA and lock in your answer there. For those of you in the chat room asking about other course notes, yep, there are Security Plus course notes. There are A+ course notes. I'm thinking of doing some other course notes as well right now, but those are the ones that you will find available on my website. And of course, there's links on the website for all of those in the top menu for all of those pieces. This doesn't seem like it would be a network problem, but this is the problem you will be faced with. As I mentioned earlier, I can't log in. The network is down. So you've gotten this ticket. I can't log in to I'm using my Active Directory credentials. It must be the network, so it has now been assigned to the network team. Now you have to resolve this problem. How can you figure out what's going on? This is going to be one also that's important to consider. You have to know a lot about the underlying technologies. As I mentioned earlier, you will rarely get what I call a trivia question on your exam. For example, they will rarely ask you on the exam, what does STP stand for? Is it Spanning Tree Protocol? Is it something? They don't give you a list of they're never going to ask you that. They never ask you that. Those are flashcard questions. They never ask you a flashcard question. Very, very rarely will you ever see a flashcard question on the exam. It's always a question that is asking you about technology, and then you have to know something underlying the technology. And this is a good example of that, where you can't log in with Active Directory. Okay, you have to know what Active Directory is. You have to know what happens during the login process. You have to know the things that can go wrong during that process. And so this is one of those you do have to kind of break down and see if you happen to know what it is. Kind of slower people submitting. I can watch the numbers here. I have 145 people that have locked in their answers so far. This is a little more challenging on this particular question. And I guess in the chat room, we're all kind of wondering, is there going to be a majority? Or are we going to get a 50% that has this here? What you do want to do, so don't throw away your flashcards, but understand the answers on your flashcards. If you have one that says STP and the other side of the flashcard says Spanning Tree Protocol, you need to also have more of a definition there and how it works. So those are the ones you will work through and being able to have those there. For those of you interested in the course notes, you mentioned this in the chat room, there is a button underneath the pricing chart that allows you to flip between the digital and physical version. That's where that is. Let's see how you did with this question. A user is not able to log into Active Directory. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this issue? Is it a duplex mismatch? Is it an incorrect date and time? Is it DHCP is enabled? Is it STP is configured? Or is it that USB interfaces are disabled? 68% of us said it's an incorrect date and time. How would that be? 14% of us said it's a duplex mismatch. We've got 11% of us say that DHCP is enabled. So that's another one that at least double digits on the answer to those. 5% said STP is configured, and 2% said USB interfaces are disabled. Now, as some of you have mentioned in the chat room, whenever you hear questions like this, for those of you that have run into these problems before, there was a set of answers you were waiting to see that never showed up. And this is something very common on the exam, is the answer that you think is the most popular answer may not be an answer that's listed in the multiple choices. So there's where you need to have a better understanding of what an extra set of options might be. You need to understand what the second most issue, what the third most issue, what the fourth most issue might be. So whenever we start getting into questions like this, you need to, of course, find the answer that is the most likely reason given the available options to you. In this case, 67% of you said it's a date and time. And although offhand you're wondering why would an incorrect clock on a machine cause an issue, Well, the answer is that we're logging in with Active Directory. There is extensive cryptography used behind the scenes. Of course, the users never see this cryptography. They're not aware of the cryptography. They don't understand they've been given a digitally signed ticket. They don't know anything about Kerberos. They just know they logged in with the right username and password, and now they can access their printer. They can get to their shared drive. But to be able for this cryptography to work properly, all of the clocks need to be at least, I say synchronized, but they need to be at least 5 minutes between each other. This is a little bit of a challenge whenever you get into that because Kerberos does use this timestamp to be able to do it. So timestamps have to be relatively close to each other. Now, most of the time, that's not a problem. All of the computers on your network are configured with Network Time Protocol, or NTP, and they are occasionally going out to probably your local NTP server. They could be going out to an internet NTP server as well, and they are updating themselves based on the times that are there. Now, you have to make sure, of course, the machine that you have locally is configured with the proper time settings for time changes. We just went through one of those a couple weeks ago. So that all the times change, so some things make a difference on your machine, maybe that you didn't configure daylight saving time on your system. Those can be an issue. And so whenever there's a time change, you sometimes will run into this type of problem where someone can't log in. So you need to check the timestamp, make sure the client timestamp is correct, make sure the server timestamp is correct, make sure that NTP is configured properly, make sure that everybody can get to and see all the different clock settings and that they are correct for this particular machine. That would be a good first step. That's an easy step to check. As soon as somebody says, I can't log in, let's quickly check the time. Let's look down at the bottom. Does it have the right time? Is it in the right time zone? You will occasionally run into somebody where the time looks exactly right. It shows that it's just after 12 noon, but then you look and it's configured for London. So that can be an issue too. You want to be sure everything matches up with time zones, timestamps, and the dates, just so you can make sure that all of the cryptography associated with Kerberos is going to work properly in usually 5 minutes. This can be configured in Kerberos, but generally 5 minutes plus or minus is what you're hoping for everything to continue to work properly. That's why in your answer, B, incorrect date and time, was 67% of you. That is the correct answer. I have a feeling some of you have had this problem before. You've run into this issue before with incorrect date and time. 14% of you said a duplex mismatch. A duplex mismatch is something you certainly don't want. It's when that one machine has been set or configured itself for full duplex. The machine on the other side is configured or set itself for half duplex. Did I get that right? It's one side's full and one side's half. It's a mismatch. Those should be the same. If it's set to half on one side, it should be set to half on the other side. If it's set to full on one side, it should be set to full on the other side. But you should not have a situation where one side is half and one side is full. You will get a number of slowdowns, especially collisions and runs and problems with these communicating. It will be relatively slow compared to what you think it should be, but it won't stop it from working. You can still log into Active Directory. You can still surf the net. You can still transfer files. But you may be thinking, this is not going as fast as I think it should be. And if you run some speed tests, you will see very clearly that you're not getting the throughput that you would expect. So duplex mismatch, although not something you want, is not going to cause this particular problem. 11% of you said DHCP is enabled. And I would say for the vast majority of devices, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol is enabled. That's what we use to automatically configure our IP addresses. Configuring or not configuring DHCP does not usually have anything to do with Active Directory. And certainly having DHCP as enabled is probably what you want. Now, if DHCP was disabled and this device did not have a proper IP address, especially if it did not have the proper DNS setting, well, then we could think that that would be an issue relating to Active Directory, because Active Directory really does rely on DNS very, very heavily to be able to work properly. But in this case, it wasn't that DHCP was disabled. DHCP was enabled, which means ostensibly we should be getting the correct DNS configuration settings. So that is not what I would think would be the most likely reason given all of these others. It's something that if you did have the correct date and time, maybe that's our next set of troubleshooting steps that we would go through. 5% said STP, the spanning tree protocol, is configured. We want spanning tree protocol configured on our switches. We don't want a switch without spanning tree because then it could be susceptible to a loop. That's not our issue. Spanning tree and Active Directory work just lovely with each other. And USB interfaces have nothing to do with Active Directory. That's not something that we would worry about either. That is not related to Active Directory or being able to log in. That's just something that that is there for you to maybe answer incorrectly, and 2% of you did. So the real one we were looking for here, if you've never run into this before, it's something you're just scratching your head over. But in fact, probably one of the most common issues for logging into Active Directory, incorrect date and time. 68% of you got that right. Now, if you're watching this for continuing education unit credit, I do give out a 1 hour of webinar category CEU just by watching this. For you to earn that CEU, you want to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click the Contact Us link. In that form, put your name, your email address, and the subject line, put that this is the March 2021 Network Plus Study Group. And in the body of the message on a line by itself, please put the super secret code word of the month or code words of the month, Active Directory. Active Directory are the super secret code words of the month. And you can, of course, put anything else you would like in that message just under that line. I do read through every single one of these. Unfortunately, I'm not able to respond to every single one of these because we get hundreds of these in a month. But I do go through all of these, and I send you back an email that has been digitally signed that says you must have watched this, and here is your 1 hour that you could use for any type of audits that may come your way. The super secret code word of the month, Active Directory. Now, I know it's top of the hour, but let's get one more question in, shall we? We'll go into a little bit of overtime to be able to go through these. This next question, a troubleshooting question, I think. This question asks, a switch is not forwarding traffic to the destination device, and the MAC address of the destination does not appear in the switch forwarding table. Which of the following OSI layers is most associated with this issue? Is it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, or layer 7? A switch is not forwarding traffic to the destination device, and the MAC address of the destination does not appear in the switch forwarding table. Which of the following OSI layers is most associated with this issue? Is it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, or layer 7? Now, if you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA, lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. The point of the super secret code word is for continuing education unit credit. If you don't have your Network Plus, you don't have your the things that you need, then this is not, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say continuing education, then you don't have to worry about it. That's the real key as you step through all of this. Hopefully that can help. If you do get a certification and you are looking for continuing education unit credit, those can help you. I think these days most people are probably using the CertMaster CE. That's probably the best thing to use for this. So I think in our particular case, fewer and fewer people are using or collecting CEUs, but there's still a number of you that do. So that's why I put this in here, and being able to be familiar with at least what that might happen to be. Let's wait a couple minutes for folks to lock in their answers on this one. Wasn't expecting an OSI layer question. There were a lot of folks that were answering earlier about especially dealing with OSI layers. Somebody was asking a question earlier to me a few days ago about the TCP/IP model, which is a different model than the OSI model, and it is a model that is not covered in the Network Plus exam. It is covered in the Cisco exam. In fact, I would say the Cisco exam is the only place you would ever use that model. It's not used out in the world. We don't even describe or talk about the TCP/IP model. I have no idea why people teach it. I have no idea why Cisco has included it, but there it is. Whenever you're talking to somebody about what's happening at a particular layer, they're really talking about the OSI model. That is what people use, or network professionals use, to talk back and forth and have a similar language about where these problems might be. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asked, a switch is not forwarding traffic to the destination device, and the MAC address of the destination does not appear in the switch forwarding table. Which of the following OSI layers is most associated with this issue? We have 75% of you that said layer 2, 12% said layer 3, 6% said layer 4, 5% said layer 1, and only 1% said layer 7. Well, if we go with the majority here, 75% of you said layer 2, and in fact, layer 2 is the right answer here. We're dealing with issues associated with MAC addresses, dealing with the communication through a switch, forwarding information from one device to another, especially dealing with things communicating between different adapter cards. That is all layer 2. So layer 2 is the thing that you would run into, the data link layer, data link control protocols. Whenever you see data link, DLC, we are referring to layer 2. When you're talking about switches being able to forward traffic, they forward based on a destination MAC address. So this would be layer 2. MAC addresses are layer 2. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as the switching layer because of that. The switching layer does provide that communication, being able to work through all of those. That might help you as well as you're going through all of this. Maybe that can give you a better understanding of what you would run into. Layer 2 is the right answer because that MAC address is involved. It would not be layer 1. Layer 1 would be the physical layer. That would be the layer where we're really dealing with the signal. Being communicating through a bad cable or a bad fiber would affect the signal. That would be a layer 1 issue. Layer 3 is the IP layer. So dealing with anything relating with an IP address, a subnet mask, a default gateway, those are IP addresses. That is a layer 3 address. That's an OSI layer 3. OSI layer 4 is when you're dealing with things at the session layer. So, or the transport layer, TCP and UDP is a very good example of transport layer protocols. The transport layer protocols, I guess there are other ones out there that we can sometimes use, but the vast majority of what you'll find on your network is going to be related to TCP or UDP. And if you're having a problem with TCP or with a particular port number, then it's a layer 4 issue. And lastly, layer 7 is your application layer. That's where you're trying to figure out why you can't log in to transfer files, why there's a problem with the application performing the way you would expect. That's something at layer 7. So that's where you would run into for all of those. For the chat room, for example, a network interface card communicates using MAC addresses. We consider those layer 2 devices. That is certainly something communicating at layer 2. Would not really be a layer 1 device. Layer 1 would be a repeater, for example, where there would not be a MAC address. You have no idea of anything at layer 2, then it's definitely a repeater. But a network interface card, there's no question. I know that you'll see different resources say it's layer 1. It is not. It is a layer 2 device. It has a MAC address. If it has a MAC address, it's layer 2. That's pretty much it. It's kind of a summary right there. You can break it down and try to figure out what may be right and what may be wrong based on that single bit of information. MAC address is in a network interface card. It is a layer 2 device. If you went through all of these questions and you're trying to figure out where can I get more information about these topics? What information do I need to know to pass this exam? How do I know if I'm studying the right thing? Then you need the exam objectives. They are free. You can get them from a link that's on my website at professormesser.com/objectives, or simply go to maybe to the internet and go ask Google, go ask your favorite search engine, where can I get CompTIA exam objectives, and it'll take you right to the page. That's the perfect place to be able to find those. It is an incredibly valuable tool. This should be the first thing you download when you're studying. It should be the last thing you reference. It's a great checklist before deciding, am I ready to take this exam? Go get these objectives. They're free. You can't beat free, right? professormesser.com/objectives is the place to go. If you're wanting to take another one of these study groups, I do one of these Network Plus study groups every month. I also have other study groups throughout the month. Next week, for example, on Tuesday, we have a Security Plus study group. And in April, on April the 14th, is our next Network Plus study group. I have 8 plus study groups on the 6th and 8th of April. I have a Security Plus study group on the 21st of April. There's plenty of things that you could do. And of course, you can go back and look at any of the replays we have here as well. Well, that covers our first hour of Q&A, but stick around because I turn the boat around, and I have phone calls and take questions from the chat room as well. We can talk all about anything you would like to talk about in the after show. That comes up next. Don't forget about my Success Bundle, my course notes, and others on my site. You can find out information at professormesser.com/netsuccess. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube. If you ever want to see the latest videos that come out, you can find it at professormesser.com/YouTube, and our weekly Network Plus questions at professormesser.com/Twitter and professormesser.com/Instagram. If you got something out of today and you really like the content that you saw, you may have learned something as well, please click that like button on this video. That thumbs up does go a long way. When I'm talking with my folks at YouTube, they like to see that folks were able to get something out of what we were doing here. And that also helps me understand that you got something out of this as well. It's always nice to see. Stick around for the after show. We will be right back with that, and I'll open up the phone lines for you. Thanks for being here for this part of the study group, and we'll see you next time on the Network Plus study group. Thanks, everyone. Let's see if I can get some other things going here. Let's get my... Now there's two of me. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. Let's see if we can get the phone lines up and running real quick, and then I'll give you the information on how you can dial in as well to be able to do this. Let's see if I've turned this up. Well, okay. I haven't even gotten this ready to type things in yet. I'm already calling in, and I don't even remember what the numbers are. Let me host a show. You can see I'm the only one here, so this is one of those situations where
enter your 6-digit PIN.
I certainly will enter my 6-digit PIN as soon as I can figure out what that happens to be, nice lady. I will do that. I think I got it right.
Welcome, Professor Messer.
I did get it right. I'm so glad. That means that you could also call in. Oh, except I don't have my details up here either. I need to make sure that you are able to see the phone number and be able to have this here. So let me change my graphics around so that you can do that. There we go. And now you can. There's the phone number. If you're calling from inside of the continental United States, you can call our toll-free number at 855-785-RJ45. West of the Rockies, 855-785-7545. If you are outside of the continental U.S., you can also call for free using Skype, because Skype will allow you to call a toll-free number without any Skype minutes required. And if that's the case, you just put a +1 at the beginning inside of Skype. So it would be +1 855-785-7545. It'll get you there. There's a lot there to go through. I clearly need some coffee at this point. This also take questions from the chat room. So if you are in the chat room, and I see a number of you in the chat room talking about those things, you're welcome to ask questions in there as well. I'll watch those go by, and we'll be able to see what questions you might have in there as well. We do have some folks that have called in on the phone line, so let's start with the 703 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Shivam. I'm calling from Virginia, so I'm taking my Network Plus test tomorrow.
Okay.
And I would just like to ask, I would like to ask, could you go further explain over, the different categories of Ethernet cable?
Is there a particular category of cable or something relating to cable categories that's tripping you up, or something you're interested in learning more about?
Yeah, the speeds and the distances of them, and the different types that there are.
This is one I think that does come up quite a bit, and I think it's probably because if you've never worked with a wiring plant before, you've never put anything into a network or configured networking with these things, then you may find that the cabling is something you've never had to worry with. Categories are some kind of weird thing that you've never run into before. Why are we even dealing with this or talking about categories? It does become a bit of a challenge to be able to break those down. The one thing, and I often see this described, is that the cable doesn't have a speed. Cable is just a bunch of copper. So there's no speed in copper cable. What determines the category of a cable is the manufacturing process is used to get a certain specification from the cable. We want to have a certain amount of near and crosstalk, a far end crosstalk. There's a whole list of tons of different statistics that are measured from one end to the other end of the cable. And if it falls into what those statistics might need to be for a particular category, we can stamp on the cable, this meets this particular category of cable. So for example, there's a category of cable for category 5E, category 6, category 6A, category 7. So there's a set of statistics that cable has to meet, set of characteristics that cable has to meet. And if it matches those characteristics, we can assign it that category of cable. So that's why we mentioned that category is there, because if we have created a cable and it matches the characteristics of what, for instance, category 5 might be, that means that we can run 1000 base T network over it. That's one of the standard Ethernet, one of the Ethernet standards that's available from the IEEE. 1000 base T, 10G base T, 10 base T. These are the reasons that some of those Ethernet standards are listed in the CompT exam objectives so that you can break some of those things down. In my video, this is the video, which one is this? It's the 2.1 copper cabling video. I have a list of those copper categories. That's the best place I think you should go to be able to find those. That's really the best way to be able to find the listing of those categories and what they are. And if you're someone who is trying to memorize those, that one is kind of rote memorization, granted, to be able to understand what categories are worth there. The organization that determines what standard of Ethernet you can run over a particular category of cable is the IEEE. If you're ever wondering what that is, you can always download a free copy of the 802.3 standard directly from the IEEE. So that's one of those that might help you as well. It is a lot of reading. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. Probably not something you would want to do for your Network Plus, but if you are at all interested in the standard, it's interesting to go through to be able to find all of those. Also in those set of cables, I have other things like pinouts for crossover cables, being able to work through all of those. That might help you as well if you go through any of those pieces. And whenever I start going through categories of cable, memorization is really the key. It really helps you too, because if somebody says we need to plug in a 10 gig connection on this copper between these two devices, okay, what cable do we run? And you have to know a number of things. Okay, how far apart are they? Now that will help me determine what category of cable I'm going to use for that. And then we plug it in. Then we know it's going to work properly because we're using the right category of cable. Let's go back to the phones. The 816 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Joe Decker from St. Joseph, Missouri.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for calling. What's your question? Go ahead.
Okay, I have been in the industry for about 4 years, and I've been out of it for about 6 years, and I'm getting back in it. I've been studying a lot of your stuff and Eli, the computer guy stuff. I want to know what you think the best step is for me to learn and refresh myself.
Oh, what particular set of technologies are you diving into at this point? Do you have a particular job that you've already taken? Are you working towards
computer
a particular
repair?
position?
Yes.
Okay. Computer repair, great place to start. I think it's probably one of the funnest things to do with what we work through. There's so many different problems that can occur in so many interesting ways to fix some of these systems that we've got. Probably the industry's most popular certification regarding computer repair, hardware, software, operating systems is the A+ certification. That's a great place to start with those. I will also say, because there is such a large number of devices running Windows, you might also want to look at some of the Microsoft certifications as well, although Microsoft has had less of an approach or less of an emphasis in their approach to operating system certifications than they have had in the past. These days, they're moving all their certifications really are cloud-based certifications, or the vast majority of them are cloud-based certifications. So A+ is really a great place to start. If you are at all interested in going kind of to the next step, once you get above Windows and kind of basic troubleshooting, look at some of the Microsoft certifications. You might also want to look at some of the Linux certifications out there. Red Hat, Linux Plus, and some of the other certs out there can be another great jumping off point. And I think that's kind of the key when we start looking at technology is we never want to stay in one place for very long. We usually will stay in one place 3 years and then we'll move to another job, or we'll keep improving on the knowledge that we happen to have. And one very common path is usually fixing the hardware and software, moving into operating systems, maybe then moving into networking, and then eventually moving into the security side of things. I think all of those are great places to go. Those may be great places to consider also for you. Have you had a chance to look at some of the A+ criteria? Is that something you might be interested in?
Yeah, I've watched all your videos.
I think that's a great place to start especially if you're trying to get back into the industry, trying to move up the ranks, getting the base foundation of hardware and software, and then supplementing that with Microsoft, Linux, even Mac OS. In some environments, I have some places I have worked where half of the systems were Mac OS devices. So it almost depends on where you are is going to dictate what direction you go with some of that. I think there would be great places to go, Joe.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for the call. Whenever I start looking at trying to figure out where to go with these certifications, it's not just any one thing. Make sure that you may have an interest in Network Plus or Security Plus, but are employers hiring and looking for those particular credentials? So it's sort of a combination of things. You may have an interest in it, but your interest is only going to take you so far, especially if you want to be able to do something else with that in a job scenario. And trying to get a job is an important reason, or one of the big reasons we go through these certifications to begin with. Back to the call, 678 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Professor Messer. This is Lionel Warner calling from Atlanta, Georgia. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
So I just had a quick question. I actually really appreciate your material first and foremost. I used it to pass the A+ and Security Plus.
Oh, great. Congratulations.
Going back. Thank you. Going back now to get the Network Plus. And I'm really getting caught up on all these different specifications and acronyms. Just wondering if you have a cheat sheet or something you suggest to remember all of this information.
Boy, you aren't wrong. Probably Network Plus, more than any other certification, is just so full of acronyms. We do a very good job in the networking industry of just creating tons and tons and tons of acronyms. One of the places I would recommend you go is to the exam objectives. You may have looked through the first part of the objectives. Mine are colored here because I go through my objectives and color some things in. But once you go through the main set of objectives, there is a Network Plus acronym list in the objectives. And it's not just a small grouping. Here's page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, 4 full pages of 2-column acronyms in the back of that. Most of these acronyms you're going to run into while you're studying for the Network Plus. It's just going to be part of what you do. There's just going to be natively, organically, you're going to go through that list, and all of these acronyms are things you will run into. Not all of the things listed in the acronym list are things you will find on the exam. So it's a little bit of a plus and minus here. It's a great list of acronyms, but you may not need all of them. But I think you probably would need most of them. As I look through the ones here, a good example of things you might need to know are things like IGMP, the Internet Group Message Protocol, or ICMP, the Internet Control Message Protocol, or we have ICANN, the Independent or the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Those are things you're going to run into in your studies. There's others in here that are a little bit different. On the side that said, for instance, the acronym PC stands for Personal Computer. Okay, well, maybe we didn't need that one in our list of acronyms, but it's in there. I guess it's important to know that a PC is a personal computer. There's certainly a lot more in here. The vast majority of this are things you would need to know. So that may be a great place to start with this, is to have that Network Plus acronym list. But as I mentioned earlier, keep in mind that you're not going to get a question on the exam that says, what does CRC stand for? Does it stand for cyclic redundancy checking? Does it stand for carrier redundancy collision? Does it stand? You're not going to get a question like that. You never get trivia questions like that on the exam. So don't spend all of your time looking through acronyms, but maybe spend your time understanding what the acronyms are and how they are applied with the technology onto the network. If you do that, they will be a valuable tool that you can use for your studies.
Okay. All right. I'll do that. Thank you. Thanks for the time. I appreciate your help.
Best of luck with your Network Plus.
Thank you. Take care.
That's one I think that sometimes we get wrapped up in the acronyms and knowing what they all are. The reality is when you start working with these technologies, you almost forget what the words are. You just use SNMP. Oh, we need to set up SNMP gathering from our workstation to the switch. Can you configure SNMP in there? Thanks. And somebody might ask, hey, what is SNMP? Oh, let me see if I remember. Simple Network Management Protocol. Okay, yes, SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. We have to think about it because we're so used to just saying the acronym over and over. In the chat room, Joe, thank you for the $5 donation where you said thanks for everything you do. Thank you for what you are doing. I appreciate that. I know I say I don't take donations. Other people said we want to find a way to do that. That's why I did turn on the super chat on YouTube. So you are able to do that. And I do appreciate that. I want to find something good to do with the donations that come in. We'll figure something out from there to be able to make that happen. And I appreciate that donation quite a bit. And it kind of goes beyond just the donation. I appreciate that you even did the donation. So that's my thanks back to you. Let's go back to the phone lines. The 901 area code. We'll take this call. Hello, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name's Mick, and I'm calling from Tennessee.
Hey, Mick from Tennessee. What can we do for you?
Hey, so I got a two-part question. It's, more pertaining to the actual test taking, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in this environment with COVID, CompTIA has allowed you to take the exam at your home on your computer. Do you recommend doing that, setting up their webcam and whatnot, or do you recommend going to an actual testing center?
There's pluses and minuses to both of these. I think we've kind of figured out how to manage going out into the world at this point, but there are still challenges with finding testing centers that are open. There are still challenges going to a testing center and just being comfortable going out with where other people might be. So I can appreciate where people have said, I don't want to go to a testing center. I don't want to be around people. That's not my thing right now. And I can understand that. The home testing is fantastic to be able to do that. For other people, though, like me, I like to have an environment already set up. I don't want to have to set up my house or a room in my house or worry that somebody's going to walk in or worry that I'm not going to have a good constant network connection and the going to have problems with the camera. That may be a problem too. So for some people that don't want to do that, going to a testing center might be less stressful for them. I've talked to a lot of people, though, that live out in very remote areas. It might be a 2-hour drive for them to get to a Pearson VUE testing center. So online testing for them is a godsend. It is something that they never had access to before. Now they suddenly do, and they can just stay at home, book their exam anytime during the day they'd like. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can just at any time find an open slot, book themselves in, make sure they have the right setup. It's well documented on the Pearson VUE website, what you need to have set up in your configuration and what you can't have in your configuration. And they take it at home and it works great for them. There have been some examples, and some folks in the previous study groups even talked about some of the bugs they ran into with the software. But I think the vast majority of people doing this from home are having a perfectly lovely time with this. It's working perfectly well for them, and it's been a very good option for them. So it's more of a personal preference. Figure out what you're most comfortable with. This is a testing environment. They're going to have it set up, and you're going to be in a stressful environment. Which is the one that's going to be the least stressful for you? And if you plan for either one of these, I think you're going to be really just fine going into this. Just plan for being at home or plan for being in the testing center. It's exactly the same test, presented in exactly the same way with exactly the same front end. So there's no advantage or disadvantage from the testing perspective. It's really more about what's most comfortable for you.
Gotcha. And with that being said, one thing I just can't seem to figure out, based on watching some of your videos and, for instance, the subnetting video, your 7-second subnetting, you're like, just write these 2 charts down. Are we allowed to have a piece of paper when we go in so that, as soon as the test starts, we can start writing these stuff down?
You are not allowed a piece of paper to write things down. You are not allowed to have a pencil and write those things down. None of that is available for you from a physical writing things down perspective. But there is in the online system, there is an online whiteboard that you can use. And the whiteboard is one that you can start typing things into and will be available on your system through the duration of the exam. So you can type in all of those things that you need to know, or type in the charts that I have. Not all of the charts need to be typed in, but sometimes it's even faster to type some of those things in instead of doing that.
Oh, for sure.
On the Pearson VUE website at home.pearsonvue.com/onview/whiteboard, there is a whiteboard for this, and it shows you what the whiteboard is about, but they have a practice whiteboard there. You know, you're not going to use your mouse to draw around like I'm doing on the screen. I think most people will simply click on the text part, and they'll click in some part, and you can type on the screen. And they'll just use that to type in anything they'd like and have that available during their exam. But that's a great way to get familiar with the whiteboard before you show up on the exam, and that might help a number of you as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll be taking my test this weekend, so hopefully it'll go good. You know, I've been watching your videos, studying extra hard, got these flashcards, and thank you again for your time.
Best of luck. I think you'll do great.
Bye.
That's always a challenge. Knowing and being comfortable with the testing is important. I want to thank Anonymous One in the chat room for your $20 donation. Thank you so much for that. It's humbling to get donations. Not used to doing that. For those of you that watched these study groups before, I've always said, why don't you buy course notes? Why don't you buy one of these things? I can give you something in return. So I do appreciate you doing that in the chat room. That does go a long way. Let's get another call in. This would be from the 240 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Oliver, and I'm calling from the Maryland area.
Well, thanks for calling. What's your question?
Yeah, so I'm currently studying for my CompTIA A+, the Core 2 series.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get my first, IT entry-level job. And I'm trying to think what certification I should get next. I was thinking about getting the Network Plus, but I'm really interested in trying to get a job in the cloud. And I know networking is pretty important, but I know there's certifications like even the Cloud Plus, and then the Microsoft Azure, and then the AWS.
Yeah.
And I also know that it's really up to the employer, like which certification you get, or I guess they have a high X factor in deciding. I was just wondering, which certification will get the most bang for the buck for trying to get a job in the cloud. For example, to get a help desk job, it's commonly known to get the A+. So in this case, what would be the next certification to get a cloud job?
It's really, I'm glad you were able to do some homework, by the way. So it's good that you've already gone out and seen some of the options available for some of the additional certifications that you could use to supplement A+. And you're right in also the respect that you don't want to overload yourself with certifications before even having that very first job. Walking in with an A+ is pretty valuable. Walking in with an A+ and 20 other certifications, that's a lot, but walking in with 7 other certifications without having any practical experience may not be the best foot forward. But I like that you're kind of looking at, all right, well, let's get A+ down, but what can really add on? What could be the value add to what we're trying to do to get that job or get that better job with what we're doing? And it may be that the cloud computing side is what all of the employers in your area are interested in. And you might find one that really likes the idea that you have some cloud computing certifications because that organization may just be doing so much on the cloud side, because most organizations are. But you also have to think about the geography you're in, where you happen to be in the world or in the country. In your particular area in Maryland, there is an enormous emphasis in Security Plus. And the reason for that is the federal government, especially the Department of Defense, considers Security Plus to be the entry-level cert for what they are doing. So they don't necessarily have an emphasis on the A+ and Network Plus. They have a larger emphasis on Security Plus. So you may find that the jobs you're going in to look for, that those jobs might actually have on them a requirement to have your Security Plus first and then your A plus. It really just depends on the employer and what they are doing. Or you may find that they have a different emphasis. One of the things I mentioned, I have a video that talks about how to get a job in IT with no experience. And one of the things I mentioned is doing some recon, going out and doing some research on what the employers in your area are looking for. And it's very useful to write down, do they want a formal education? What are they looking for? Is it a 4-year? Is it a master's degree? Do they want a doctorate of some kind? I've seen crazy things. There's also organizations that may want you to have certain industry certifications. They will list out what industry certifications they really like. And then they have other things they may want you to be knowledgeable in. They may want you to be knowledgeable in Cisco switches. They may want you to be knowledgeable in Windows Server. They may want you to be knowledgeable in Linux. They'll have a list of those things. You need to see what all of the employers in your area are asking for and see if you start to see a number of these things that come up over and over and over again. So if you start to see Security Plus is coming up in all of these different job postings I'm seeing, I know I wasn't thinking about getting Security Plus, but maybe that would be a good idea. Maybe the issue is you're looking through the list and everybody wants those Azure certs. Well, okay, well, maybe I need to go get one of those Microsoft Azure certs. It's just going to depend what the employers in your area would like. And it is dramatically different depending on where you are. DC is very different than New York, which is very different than LA, which is very different than Miami. So for anybody else who's watching or listening, look at the jobs in your area or jobs that are available in a place you would like to be and see what they're looking for. I think that would be a much better way of stepping through this to really see if you've got the right approach to what the next cert would be.
Yeah. Because like Microsoft Azure and like AWS, those are the top 2 most popular like cloud certs in terms of my area. But my last question would be, in comparison with like the Cloud Plus, Microsoft Azure, and AWS, do you think Cloud Plus is like a good certification for like a base level, to get like base level knowledge, or is it all right for someone to just go straight to like the vendor specific with Microsoft and or Amazon?
Yeah, I think the vendors do cover the basics very well. So I don't necessarily think Cloud Plus is required prior to jumping into the industry certs like Microsoft or AWS. I think that Cloud Plus is probably good for an entry level, maybe help desk to be able to understand the cloud technologies. But if you're wanting to go into cloud technologies, and I think that's a great place to go right now. That's one of the hottest areas of IT is dealing with the cloud. We've really only just scratched the surface of what we've been able to do with the cloud. So if you really want to get in on the ground floor and work your way up, AWS or Microsoft Azure are 2 very good places to start. And if you've already got an interest and you're sort of leaning that direction, keep leaning that way. Go get that Microsoft cert, go get the AWS. I would think most employers are probably asking for those 2 before they are asking for Cloud Plus. Maybe I'm wrong, but the only way to know is if you go out and see what employers might be asking for there. That may be a good way to break those down and go through the details.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much it. I appreciate your time and your hard work that you put into these videos. I definitely wouldn't have passed my Core 1 A+ without your help. I appreciate it.
Best of luck with that Core 2. I think one of the things that I always run into whenever I'm trying to figure out what to do next is I always have an idea what I think is interesting. I always have an idea what I would like to do. But very often that is not the same thing as what employers would like me to be doing. So there is this push and pull where you have to kind of find the useful middle ground. You know, maybe it's all about upward mobility for you. So maybe you don't care what your personal interest is. You want to get that better job. I'm going to go get AWS or I'm going to go get Azure because everybody's asking for that or whatever it happens to be. But it's nice if you have at least a way to blend those things together. you can always eventually circle back to the things that interest you. And you may find that the things that interest you do give you some upward mobility, but you have to figure out how best to approach that as you are putting together your own personal credentials. It becomes important to get through the initial process, kind of the candidate information filters that they have there. And then ultimately talking with somebody in an interview, they're going to ask you about these things. Those would be good things to have there as well. That I think helps a lot. Bob in the chat room, passed your Network Plus this past weekend. Congratulations. I'm glad the videos were able to help. But as I always say, you did the hard part. That is the one I think that is the more challenging part, is actually sitting down and taking the exam. So congratulations. Yes, behind me is that white Rubik's Cube, which does light up if you give it power. So it's not as hard to solve. It is very difficult to solve without the power. To have that there. Also, very quickly in the chat room, the Exam Hacks ebook is not available separately currently. There are some things happening where I want to be able to provide the Exam Hacks ebook with some other products. I'm hoping to have that out by next week. So maybe you'll see some things change on the website regarding Exam Hacks. There's some great information in that ebook. I would like more people to have their hands on that information. So I'm trying to find a way to make that happen on my site. And I think I've got a good way to do that. But you'll just have to keep checking back on that. It's a little bit too early for me to talk about any details, but I will try to get it done by next week. Yes, sir. I'm on it. I hear you. 571 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how you doing, Professor?
Thanks for calling. What's your question? Hi.
Hi, yes, my name is OJ. I'm calling from Woodbridge, Virginia. I have a question. So I'm currently doubling up with the Network Plus and Security Plus. I know I'm just going to go ahead and take the Security Plus before it expires out. Between now and July 30th, should I just stop studying for Network Plus and then just full force go study for Security Plus?
If it were me, I would stop studying one of those. It's hard enough to pass one of these exams. They are just so big to get these things done. And especially considering the 501 Security Plus exam does have this deadline, which, it's not right on top of us. July 31st seems like a long way away, but those things tend to come up very quick. And because you're on that sort of tighter time frame, I would absolutely recommend putting Network Plus off to the side and finishing up the 501 materials if that's the direction you're going, just so you can get your Security Plus in your pocket with the existing 501 exam, which is going to be significantly easier than taking the 601 materials. There is no real need. There's a little overlap in content between the Network Plus and the Security Plus, but the reality is only 11% of those exam objectives are identical between those. And they aren't identical, because the Network Plus has a different approach to these topics than the Security Plus tends to. The place where you start to see some overlap is maybe with cloud computing technologies, maybe some of the networking infrastructure devices, but you're going to learn that anyway in Security Plus. So it's not like learning Network Plus gives you much of a leg up, because you've got to go through it anyway if you're studying for Security Plus. So if it was me, I'd study for the 501 right now, get the 501 done, get that exam passed, get it in your pocket. It's good for 3 years, then shift gears back to Network Plus, and I think you'll be good.
Okay. And lastly, now this one you may not fully be aware of, felons in IT. Is there a chance that a felon can get a job such as a sysadmin just from having the Security Plus, or a network admin, or anything of the sort? So the felon just not even concerned about trying to get into the IT field?
No, I know of felons who are working in the IT field. It is not, there's obviously challenges in finding the right employer for things like that. And it also depends on the circumstances around the felony. So this was a topic that came up on Reddit, I think about a month ago. People were discussing this, and that may be a good place to go back. I want to say it was in the CompTIA subreddit, but it may not have been. It may have been one of the other Reddits. And I'll have to do some research and find out which one that was. But there are employers out there who, depending on what the felony was and what how long ago it may have been, and other things that you may have done since then, that will take that under consideration and have no problem making a hiring decision based on that. There are other employers, obviously, that deal with other types of maybe governmental or security type situations where maybe it's not quite as easy for them to pull the trigger on hiring somebody who has a felony. So, but there are still jobs out there in IT for someone who has that particular background. One of the advantages, I think, of IT is that, first, it's very broad. Everybody needs technology. And it's a type of job where if you're trying to get into the mainstream of what's going on, that it's a great place to be. And it pays pretty well. It's a fantastic place, regardless of what your background might be, being able to move up and do well for yourself and your family. The only thing I would highly stress to anyone who's in that situation where there's something in your background or something that could come up later on during the process of filling out the applications and doing this, make sure that everyone is aware of this particular thing that could come up, because it's going to come up eventually. For most of us probably already understand that, but I have been in situations where I have been the manager, and later on I found out about something that was not disclosed during the interview process, and immediately it causes a problem. So being as open as possible and having the documentation there and having people understand your story and understand how you got to where you are now is probably more important than simply stating, yes, I have a felony and it's on my record. You know, there's never, with something like that, it's not just a single story. It's not a check mark and it's either yes or no. There are all these different variables involved, and it's going to be a combination of finding the right employer, looking for the right kind of people, and being able to support you with whatever you want to do in IT. The jobs are out there. You just have to find the right scenario.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Those were my two questions. Once I get off today, I'm going straight to studying for my Security Plus then.
Good. That's a great recommendation, a good decision, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For anyone else who's thinking of doing that, not many people realize the SY0501 exam is going to be around until July 31st. That's the Security Plus exam. The next version, the 601 exam, is also already out. So you could choose between both of those right now. The 601 exam is 30% larger, 30% larger, a much bigger exam. So therefore, it's a little more difficult. You have to remember so much more in the exam. So that's why I recommend people go get that current version, because on July 31st, you won't have the choice. That's a big difference. Normally, we don't see that type of growth on these exams, but this one was. And boy, that's a big difference. Back to the phones, 361 area code. Thanks for holding for so long. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, my name is Rudy from Texas.
Thanks for calling. What's your question?
First of all, 30% is that's a big increase.
It's big.
On that Security Plus.
Yep.
Wow. Currently, I'm in the CCNA program. We are
Great.
at the topic of ACLs, access control list. First question was, do you have a way of simplifying ACLs? And my second question will be, I know you always give advice on how to find the jobs, and I know you stated before that help desk is kind of like a starter, but how about people that are trying to start a business in IT as far as networking? Do you have any advice for them? Or
perhaps so. Is there a particular area or a particular type of business that interests you the most?
Yeah, I was because to me it's kind of I was already kind of into IT, but then it kind of took a turn when I got into networking. It was kind of unplanned. It was more of a spur of the moment. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go into IT. I'm going to go into networking. And it's like, oh, it's a total different world. Okay.
Yes, it is.
But as far as a career, I'm looking into like maybe installing networks, large networks, as like in a school or a business.
This is all good things. So let's first talk about. I liked your question on: is there an easier way to work with access control lists, ACLs, or what some people call ACLs for some unknown reason? Access control lists. Is there an easier way? No, Cisco made it really, really complicated. Not really complicated, but they made it more complicated than it really needed to be. For those of you that have never worked through access control lists before, I know I'm not showing this full screen just so I can kind of keep an eye on the chat as we're doing this. But the idea of an access control list with a bunch of routers is what we have kind of in this picture, where we can make decisions on what is either allowed into a router or allowed out of a router based on a list of access control statements within the configuration of the device. To complicate things further, there's not just one type of access control list in a Cisco router. There are standard access control lists and extended access control lists. And of course, for the most part, you'll probably be using extended, but there's some cases where standard ACL, standard ACL would work just fine. You mentioned there being earlier ways to do it. The part of the thing that just annoys me to no end is the way that it was originally implemented is with the mask that is set up. It's a wildcard mask, which is similar to a subnet mask, except completely opposite. It is a mirror image.
Totally.
And I think if I had to think through what are the biggest things I run into of being able to visualize access control lists for Cisco, is really trying to understand these wildcard masks better. And once you understand that they are sort of a mirror image of a subnet mask, it tends to help a little bit more. But I end up having to really do conversions, binary conversions of the subnet mask into a wildcard mask, just so I can create the access control list and have it work a little better. Once you get past that point, you can get into more of configuring a standard ACL, configuring the extended ACLs, and doing those types of things. I love how the chat room says, oh, just subtract from 255, which is what I have on the screen. But you're talking to someone who doesn't calculate things very well in the middle of an exam session. That's my problem. Plus, I spend a lot of time with subnet masks and having to do things backwards. But every Cisco person will tell you this, is that, oh, you just subtract from 255. What's the problem? The problem is that my brain won't allow me to do that properly. That's the problem. And I think other people are sort of in the same scenario. They should not have had to do it this way to begin with, but they kind of did this in the code, and now there it is for us to enjoy until the end of time. But that's sort of the approach I would take with this, is kind of focusing on ACLs that way. That's a very broad topic. It's a very difficult topic to get through. But if you can spend time really, really understanding ACLs and take it a little step at a time to pull on all of the different layers of it, it is an extremely valuable tool. It's one you will use very often in the routers and firewalls that come from Cisco. And of course, the idea of an ACL is not something Cisco specific. There are other types of products out there that use control lists to be able to allow or disallow traffic, and understanding how those work at sort of the lower levels will help you not just in Cisco, but all those other devices as well.
Okay, so it's not only a Cisco thing.
Well, Cisco certainly calls them ACLs, and having wildcard masks is commonly associated with Cisco devices. But the idea of an ACL exists in Microsoft Windows. The idea of an ACL exists in Linux. It exists in other routers and switches and firewalls too. There's different nomenclature and different terms that we use, but it's still the same idea. And ultimately, at its lowest level, it still is an access control list.
Okay, cool.
Hopefully that'll get you through. That's sort of in a very short period of time. That's my go get 'em kind of answer without giving any type of definitive substance, but at least that might help a little bit with what you're doing.
All right, yeah.
Appreciate the call. Best of luck.
And thank you.
I think whenever I get into dealing these slides here are from my older Cisco course, that never really came to fruition. So you're kind of seeing the slides here that you've never seen before because they did not exist. They ended up going into my course notes, and that's what that is. But there's obviously a lot of Cisco stuff in my background too, although my focus was more about how do I remove a Cisco device from the network and put in the better competing device. So I did a lot of Cisco. It just turns out a lot of it was how do I get the Cisco device out and put my device in. But that meant I had to know a lot about the Cisco devices to make that happen. That's kind of where that course came from. Back to the phone lines. Thanks for holding for so long. The 786 area code. I have here that this is Joshua. Hi, Joshua. What's your question?
Hi, Messer. I wanted to know, let's say a user calls in and they no longer have access to a file. How would you approach that?
There's so many questions that go along with any of these types of problems that come in, but there's a number of things you would need to know to be able to answer this, which is how is the file accessed? Normally, is this something that has changed recently? Has somebody made a modification to the file? Is this a file accessed by multiple people? You sort of have to build the story of how this works. I tend to work from the bottom up. So somebody came to me and said, hey, there's a file I accessed yesterday. Now I can't access it anymore. Now I need to know more. So I'll start asking questions of someone and say, well, how do you normally access the file? Well, I go into Excel and I go to my M drive and I go to a particular folder and I access it there. And so now we can start asking questions. Okay, are you able to get into Excel properly? Yes, I am. Are you able to access Drive M and see that there are files in there? Yes, I am. Or no, I'm not. Are you able to find the file in the folder? Yes, I am, or no, I am not. Okay, when you click on the file, what do you get? Is there a message that comes up? Now, those are the types of things we go. Or somewhere in that process, they're like, well, I don't even see there's an M drive. Okay, well, maybe this isn't a file problem. You know, the user said, I can't access the file, but they don't know. They're not supposed to know how drive mapping works in Microsoft Windows. They just know they can't access that file. So hopefully going through this sort of steps of asking the questions and getting more information about the problem, which is the first step of the troubleshooting process from the CompTIA A+ exam, that becomes extremely important because we can now start filling in the gaps ourselves, and understanding how it works is more important than simply giving an answer. I see this often in a chat room. There was a question that came up in my chat room on my website recently where someone said, I'm not able to do this particular thing. And everybody in the chat room started throwing out, well, try this and try that and try this and try that. But nobody stopped and asked, well, what do you mean by I can't access the file? You know, that really was the most important part of that question, which is I can't access the file, but I don't have anything in there. You haven't given me an error message. You haven't given me a scenario. I don't know what operating system you're using. I don't know how you normally access the file. There's all these other things that go along with that. So whenever you get a question like that, my recommendation always is to start asking more questions, start filling in all of the blanks you have, and then you can start making some decisions about where do you go from here and what other things can we try. Hopefully that can help with your troubleshooting.
Yeah, and when do you decide to escalate a ticket? Because I don't want to spend too much time on one.
Well, I don't know that escalation is normally my biggest concern when working with tickets. It's usually at the point where I've asked the questions, I've got the scenario of things that have occurred, I've sort of built the picture of what the customer is working with, but maybe they're working with an application that I have no knowledge of whatsoever. Oh, you're not using Excel? You're using ++C. Okay, I don't know what that is. So let me call someone who has familiarity with that application so that we can all work together to figure out the pieces of that. Or once you've gotten to a point where you've found the error that's occurring, but you can't figure out why that error is occurring, that's a perfect place to start moving up the line. Anytime you get to a point where you can say, I don't know about this, that's where you need to pull someone in. The part where I see a lot of technicians really struggle is they found themselves in the middle of a situation where they don't know what this problem is. They have collected some information, but they're still not able to put it all together. But then they just sort of go through Google searches. They spend days trying to find more information on this problem. They leave a message with a support line somewhere, but they've never asked someone else in the organization. They never moved up in the organization to try to get more people involved with this problem. Anytime you hit a wall, that's the time you should be calling someone else and saying, what other things can you think of doing with this? And you're not handing it off to someone else. You're really trying to pick the brain of someone else and see if they've seen a problem like this before to see where to go. I think being able in yourself to have the confidence to say, I don't know, let's get some other eyeballs on this, can be extremely useful. There's a place everybody has where it's a balancing act, where suddenly you realize, I need to get more knowledge. I need to get more people in the room looking at this one. You need to be more familiar. You always need to be familiar with where that line is. And as soon as you cross that line, go ahead and pull the trigger. Don't ever sit on it. Don't ever hope that maybe you'll be able to pull it back across the line, because that almost never happens. You need more people involved in this. Feel free to call out to other people and make sure you have that escalation policy in place.
Right. And the last question is, what are some good ways to secure a website?
Well, if you look at what most of the industry is doing, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of very good firewalls. It's a combination of very good filters on a server. It's a combination of applications and security on a server to watch individual files. There is intrusion prevention. There is brute force protection. There is the ability to look at what people may be uploading or not uploading. There is reverse proxies. And it's never any one single combination of things. It's always a mixture of things, and it may change depending on the throughput you need, the amount of people hitting a server, the type of application in use. In my particular case, if you're hitting the Professor Messer website, you're going through a reverse proxy. You're not hitting my website. I'm first looking at what you're sending to my site. I'm evaluating the information you're asking for. I'm making sure that what you're asking for is not something that would be considered malicious, and then I'm allowing that conversation to occur. Once it hits my web server, I then go an extra step and examine the request again for known vulnerabilities for WordPress, CentOS, whatever operating system I'm running or database I'm using or web server content I'm using. I also do additional checks on the server itself. So it's like whenever we talk about defense in depth, that's what we're talking about. And defense in depth is going to serve you well regardless of the scenario. Just make sure you have all the layers covered and that you're really looking out for whatever the major security issues might be for your environment.
All right, thanks.
I appreciate the call. Thanks so much. One of the things that I always run into, and I see this a lot with security, especially since my background is in IT security, next generation firewalls specifically, was that we always would love to have that one thing. And whenever I would talk about the next generation firewalls and being able to put these on a network, they are very capable. They are a firewall. They are a very competent IPS, probably some of the best IPS you'll run into. They will find viruses. They will identify someone transferring files with sensitive information. They're very, very, very capable devices, but they don't do everything, nor would you expect them to. There's still a need to have spam filtering. There's still a need to be able to monitor traffic going into an individual server. There's still a need to stop brute force attacks. There's still a need for managing denial of service better. A firewall can only go so much. So you do need to have those layers of security on top of all of those pieces. And I think that's where, if you're ever in a situation where you're trying to decide what do we do with this, don't think so much about what technologies we need. You need to think about what are we trying to protect? Where's the data? Where is the gold? The data is the most important part. So the data is going to be what you're trying to protect. What do we put in front of that data to make sure we're covering all of these bases? And by the way, the game is changing constantly. We've seen this most recently with ransomware. Ransomware has been one of the biggest things we've had to deal with in recent years. So how do we prepare ourselves for a ransomware attack? We can't stop every single spot, but how can we prepare ourselves to stop as much as we possibly can? And then on the other side of this, how do we mitigate it if it does happen to occur? There's so many situations where companies would have done well to have an offline backup. Even an offline backup that was a day old is incredibly valuable when suddenly all of your systems are hit with ransomware. You know, that's the challenge. And in the chat room, Dean's right. You know, the 0 days, you can't protect against those. You have to protect broadly and do the best you can. There's always going to be a piece of software out there that has a vulnerability that you don't know about, but the bad guys do. And that's the biggest challenge that I think any IT professional, any security professional is worried about is, how am I going to protect against the 0 day? Well, there are things you can do to protect against 0 days, but they have to be done now, not once the 0 day is out in the wild. That's the real challenge for any IT. That's what keeps security professionals up, to have all of those things there. But probably even more important is we want to block it, but then we also want to have a way to recover should it happen to get in. You have to be ready for plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and be able to have the strategy in place now so that you're back up and running. The folks that have already set the stage, they've already planned for a ransomware infection, are going to be fine. They've already got backups. Those backups are offline. The ransomware can't hit them. They're done every day or every hour or every week or whatever makes sense for them. So that's one of those situations where you'll have to probably measure what your plan for a layered security might be and then implement that in your environment. That's so much easier said than done. That's a lot of planning. It's a lot of implementation, and you're effectively, it's insurance for something that might never happen. You're spending a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort trying to put together a plan that hopefully you'll never use. That's insurance, right? You're paying for insurance now. You have car insurance, you have house insurance. I'm in Florida, I have flood insurance. There's all kinds of insurances. I hope I never have to use any of them. But if I run into a situation, you're going to be really glad you have it. You can't ever be insured enough, in my opinion. You should over-insure yourself, and probably more so from an IT security perspective. Be very, very secure. Be very prepared for whatever that happens to be. The chat room question, does the Network Plus course material update this year? We will see a new Network Plus exam in September, apparently. Keep checking back to the CompTIA website to confirm that, but September is the time frame that I have seen. One of these, I think, if you ever get into this, is I know whenever I start looking at updating data, usually they come out with the newer exam objectives about a month, sometimes 2 months before. But the important thing to remember, the existing Network Plus exam, the N10007, we believe will be available through July of next year. So don't worry about what may be coming later in the year or not. We don't know if it actually will show up in September. The important thing is work with what you have right now. It's the exam version that will be around for at least a year, probably more. Get the Network Plus certification, earn it, put it in your pocket, put it on your resume. That's much more valuable than waiting. If you're waiting, you're competing now against everybody who's already took the exam. They already passed the exam. They already have their certification. They're walking in the room saying they're Network Plus certified. And you're saying, well, I wanted to wait. I don't know why you're waiting. I don't even know what that is. Never, never wait to get certified. That is sort of the mantra that you will hear me say. And that's why. Because somebody else is not going to wait and they're going to get the job. So that's why I always recommend constantly check back on those dates, have an understanding of how quickly you think you can get that exam done, and make your decisions based on those things. That's the important part, I think. Let's go back to the phones. The 416 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? We're calling from.
I'm calling from Toronto.
Thanks for calling. A Canada checking in. I'll let Mrs. Professor Messer know.
Awesome. That's great. I'm curious your thoughts on the future of SNMP and where that roadmap might go.
I haven't seen the details of what a V4 might be at this point. I think I read something about SNMP generally speaking, but the current version of SNMP works really, really well. It's used extensively on the networks that we are using today. It's extremely capable management protocol, but of course it's really a very specifically designed protocol. It's designed to ask a server for some information and have the server respond to us. And one of the great benefits about SNMP is, one, it's been around for so long that it's just a mainstay in the networking industry. And it's relatively simple. The S in SNMP is an important part of that, the simple part of the network management protocol, because network management can be very convoluted. But if all you want to know is for a particular interface on a particular router, are there any errors? That's all you want to know. You can ask the router, hey, on that interface, how many errors have come through? And the router will tell you. None, 2, 7, 100, a million, whatever it happens to be. So we're asking a very simple piece of information. We're getting a very simple piece of information back. That's all we want. That's a great way to monitor. It's very commonly used for monitoring from the ability to at least back and forth be able to keep track of what a device is doing. Maybe just know that it's up and running. SNMP very commonly used just to do uptime checks. I have 100 routers. Every 60 seconds, go out to every single one of those routers and just have it respond back with, are you alive? And you get a message back via SNMP. Maybe it's giving you statistics about memory or buffering or throughput or utilization or whatever it happens to be. Those are valuable statistics. So I don't see SNMP going away so much. In fact, SNMP is so well ingrained in our networks today that it'd be unusual to see it go anywhere. But there's always a need for the next set of things. I think the next set of things, and we see Cisco doing this in their latest certification, is integrating with the API of devices, using things like Python to be able to talk to the very specific application programming interfaces of a firewall, of a router, of a voice gateway, of a wireless console, and being able to ask very complex and very specific questions of those devices and get very complex and very specific questions back. So it's sort of a combination of things. You're never going to just use SNMP. You're never going to not use SNMP. You're going to combine it with a lot of other things. And these days, those lots of other things tend to be APIs and being able to integrate with those using a very common scripting language like Python, which is one of the reasons I tell people all the time, if you want to be very valuable in whatever job you're going to get in IT, know how to script, know how to automate, know how PowerShell works, know how to use it very well, know how Python works, know how to use it very well. In fact, if you just do those two things, if you just do Python and you just do PowerShell, you got a lot now that you're able to work through. It is huge amounts that you'll be able to do with just those two things. And by the way, you'll have knowledge that a lot of people in IT don't have currently. And that, of course, will position you very well for moving up or moving out or doing more with IT because you have these skills that nobody else happens to have.
Do you think that NetConf is kind of where that Python is coming into play, being able to automate that way?
It could be. We've tried different hats on top of SNMP. We've tried NetFlow. We've tried SNMP variants to be able to do this. And they all have their place and they all work very well for the things they're doing. But we've never quite seen them catch on as well as others, probably because of the overhead involved. SNMP is so simple and you're able to build servers inside an SNMP server inside of a switch that doesn't affect the throughput of the switch because it's so simple. When you start adding on more layers to these things and more functionality and more capabilities, you need more of an engine to be able to keep those things going. So it turns out to be more of a trade-off. I guess in the right situation, that would make sense, but so does NetFlow, so does querying an API, and some of those other pieces too. And of course, they all have advantages and disadvantages as well between them. It's just finding the right thing that works for you and what you're trying to get out of it. We very often in networking just think, oh, we need SNMP, so turn SNMP on. Well, the next question is, okay, what are you going to query? Well, I don't know. We probably should have started the other way. We probably should have started with, what is the information we want to get from these devices? Then we can decide, how do we get that information? We often go the wrong direction with doing these things. It may be that you don't need SNMP at all. Maybe you just need the API, or maybe it's the other way around, but you need to start with what your requirements are and then work your way into how you would make that happen given the technologies available to you.
I think I agree, and I think that one of the big pieces is finding a network management or monitoring system that works well with SNMP and kind of is able to navigate the MIB structure that can be complicated, and diving through each different each of the structure and each layer that you have to go through to find the information. Because really, it's about, usually, if it's monitoring, you're probably gathering statistics, and you want to see the difference in interface bandwidth and how many packets per second are going through an interface. So that's a big piece.
Well, you're in luck because there's a company called SolarWinds that has an amazing console that you're going to love. Probably a reference there that wasn't caught. That was the software for other people who are listening. That was the software that was infiltrated by what we believe are the Russians, and was able for them to gain access to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies and take all of their content from all their data, and hold them hostage and break into their emails. Just when you think you have the right software to be able to do something, now suddenly we can't use it anymore. That's really the problem. I think you were right. I've almost stopped you where you said, I just need to find the right software to be able to. Well, you're right. That's it. That's all you need to say, because it is hard to find the right piece of SNMP software. Do you go with some of the Cactus-like open source? Do you go with something that is a corporate product but might have costs and limitations associated with it? There is, to be fair, and to your point, there is nothing that is perfect out there to do this. We kind of have to find a way to find the software. We have to find the software that works best for what we want to do. And it is a challenge. There's nothing out there that's easy, but there's plenty out there that's powerful. I guess it's a matter of finding the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, and you hope that those supply chain attacks don't come by too often, and hopefully they patch their software, and that's in the past.
It's things we've had to deal with for so long in other parts. It's almost unusual it took that long to get it into the network management side of things. But these types of attacks, even for WordPress, and I'm thinking specifically because WordPress is a content management system that is so widely used. We've been having to fight this problem for years of people getting hold of the plugins, putting their own software in there to be able to hack into people's websites. It's a real problem. And it's interesting that it finally made its way into the network management side, but I doubt we've seen the end of it.
I think it's worth mentioning, seeing as how network monitoring systems are a big part of Network Plus. And just having that big picture, it really gives that big picture, and let's say an admin monitor the network and alert and send emails, and it's an important part of network monitoring. Thank you for taking my call.
I appreciate the call. Thanks so much. That's one for those wondering. I made the reference to Mrs. Professor Messer. She is Canadian, but not Canadian. Her mom and dad are Canadian, but she's not Canadian. It's a long story. But I always like when Canada calls in, because we have family in Canada, we have family in the U.S. So we will absolutely work either side of that. We're just North American to be able to have those things there. Let's go back to the calls. We'll go to, thanks for holding for so long. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Randy calling. I'm calling from Belgrade, Serbia.
Hey, Randy. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
I wanted to ask you a few questions. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you just fine. Thanks.
Great. So I just recently went back to school because my old job in security, I used to work personal security. I was in the military for several years, and this coronavirus hit, and not much personal security going on, not much travel,
Right.
not much stuff like that. So I enrolled to school, and at the last minute, one of my friends who's a cybersecurity professional, I believe he's a penetration tester, has been telling me for years, Randy, I think you have a good mind for this. You should really look into cybersecurity. So I changed my degree last minute, and I couldn't be more happy because the subject is just 10 miles deep, 10 miles wide. There's a lot to do in IT and in cybersecurity. And to get to my questions is the school that I'm going to. So far, I'm thrilled with them. They're kind of, working with the VA, and so they're very welcoming to veterans. But each class that I take, I went into the school's system and I downloaded all the syllabuses of every class you need to graduate.
Wow.
And when I'm looking through them, and I'm starting out now, I'm studying for A+. And at the end of every semester, you have the opportunity to take a lot of certifications. Almost every class is to prepare you, it says in the syllabus, for this or that certification.
Great.
So right now I'm studying for A+, and next on my the next class I'm registered for is networking, which, as you can imagine, is CompTIA's Networking Plus. So I wanted to know these certifications the VA is paying for. So that's free. The school I'm going to is free, and I'm getting paid, a stipend of about $800 a month to go to school.
Wow.
And I'm living in Serbia, where the cost of living is very low. So I have an excellent deal set up here. But my question is what do you recommend? I hear a lot of conflicting information about certifications, and they're like, hey, this one's expensive. Maybe you don't need this one or that. But in my particular situation, where you're going to them and they're all free, should I just be racking up certifications and just have, 7 or 8 of them, all the way from A+, Network Plus, then the next will be Security Plus, and then I'll look around in cloud or penetration testing, beginner certifications? Or you think I should just be racking these up, or should I focus on one thing and kind of go that route?
It's a good question on strategy, and it's one that I even mentioned earlier in the study group, that you don't want to be in a situation where you show up at an entry-level job and you've got 10 certifications under your belt, and you're using all 10 of those as some type of set of bargaining chips. They don't work that way. The certifications have a very specific use for a very specific set of jobs. And whenever you start working through all of those, I think whenever I start working through all of those and trying to figure out what do I need for a particular job, I might even not tell an employer of a particular certification I have because it doesn't apply for the job that I'm going into. I recently got a job where one of my last jobs I worked on was a security job. It was an IT next generation firewall systems engineering job. But I had a lot of other certifications from CompTIA. I had A+ and Network Plus. Well, I probably didn't want to use my A+ and Network Plus credentials talking to a next generation firewall company. And when I was talking to them, by the way, there were no next generation firewalls. I was kind of getting into the industry's very early on next generation technologies. So whenever you start getting into that situation, you don't want to say, I am the perfect guy to lead your innovative, groundbreaking, world-changing technologies because I have an A+ cert. That's not going to help you when you walk into the job. So I understand the approach that these companies are taking. They want to give you as much knowledge as possible to build the set of certifications that you can have under your belt. But you wouldn't necessarily use all of them at once. It's not like you're throwing them all on the table and saying, Yahtzee, I got it. Look, there's everything here. So I'll take the job now, because it doesn't work quite like that. But the other side of that is that if you are working along getting those certs, now you've got some knowledge of A+ information. You've got the networking information. Maybe you've done Security Plus, so there's security knowledge. Maybe you've done some Microsoft certs, so you know more about Microsoft and Active Directory. Maybe you went and got some Cisco certifications, so you're very familiar with the switching and the routing. These are technologies now you know how they work. You understand, maybe even if you're not managing a Cisco network, you understand how the switches are working, and that helps you troubleshoot problems with switching. So that's the benefit you get from these clearinghouses that kind of put you through the paces of earning 10 certs. But just know that on the end, once you're done with that, you're not going to be throwing down all 10 of those certs on an entry-level position and saying, okay, I've got all the knowledge I need to be able to succeed with this, because they're not used that way. In fact, many times you're going to customize in best case, customize your resume for the job posting that's been made. There's no reason to tell somebody that you've earned this higher level cert when they're trying to hire you for a help desk. If you have a CCNA from Cisco and you're trying to apply to a help desk, and I'm the help desk manager, I probably am not going to hire you because you have credentials that I feel you'll be bored in this help desk position. But in reality, you don't have any IT experience at all. That would be the best possible position for you, but you've sort of given the employer the wrong light as to what you want to be able to do. So there is such a thing as being overqualified, or to show an employer that you may be overqualified, and it does factor into the decision-making process for the person who's making that hiring choice. So you want to find the job description. You want to see exactly what they're asking for in the job description and give them exactly what they're asking for. At that point, you can have a conversation. You can get an interview. You can be face-to-face. You can be on Skype. And then you can start doing a little bit more feeling out of the type of things they're looking for. And that might be a conversation you have with them about the lab that you've got at home and the things you found when you plugged in a firewall, or the things you found when you started building out your own Microsoft server infrastructure. Those are the stories that take you to the next level, not necessarily the fact that you have these other 7 certifications and don't you want to have a look at those too, because in reality, that may not be the best approach.
Yeah, makes sense. I've had a lot of job experience in several different fields, and it's kind of like that. I don't go to a security job and mention my experience on cruise ships or something like that. I have probably 4 different resumes for 4 different kind of job hunts that I have, and that's kind of the same thing. But I'm wondering that since these classes are basically study courses, they're not they're college courses. At the end I'll have a bachelor's in networking and cybersecurity.
Great.
But since they're free and they're I'm pretty much like right now I'm studying A+. So as soon as this semester is done, you have a discount for taking it, which the VA reimburses me for. So I'm just wondering that if you have the opportunity, like me in this unique situation where they're paid for and you're taking classes on them anyway, should I be taking them, or should I just kind of focus on the more important ones?
I'd absolutely take them if you can, because they're top of mind. You've gone through the process. It doesn't cost you anything to do this, so that's a huge benefit. These certification exams are not inexpensive. They cost some money when you're not using the discounted version of them. So that's a great opportunity to take advantage of. Even if you don't end up using that cert in your immediate job hunt, having that certification can certainly help you down the road. So because you've gone through the process, you've got the knowledge, it's been everything you've been doing for the last month or two, you've gone through the class, might as well get the certification at the end of it so that later on it might come in handy. There's no downside to that. It's no downside having the 10 certs. The downside is using them incorrectly later on to try to get that job.
Okay, makes sense. And I want to let some other people get in through the call waiting list, but I just have one more question, and it's basically on the path. I've watched a lot of videos from your peers on YouTube, from Network Chuck, from John Hammond, from David Bombal, and they talk a lot about, they give a lot of great, career path advice. And I just wondered what you thought for people who wanted to get into cybersecurity in that area, SOC analyst, penetration tester. As far as your first job, I hear a lot about help desk. You mention it a lot. Everyone else mentions it. And then after you get some experience there through IT, what do you think would be your kind of route to go? What kind of security jobs would you be looking into as somebody without a lot of experience? And you have that catch-22 that's like, well, you need experience to get a job, but you need a job to gain experience. So what do you think about that? Could you reflect on that a little bit?
The one overriding set of credentials that is a game changer when it comes to getting a job in IT security is having a strong foundation in networking. It is the number one set of skills you will use in security. And I don't know that it's completely obvious to other folks who haven't worked in IT security before, because everything you do in security tends to have some networking hook related to it. I use these examples in our study groups a lot. For example, I need to implement a next set of next generation firewalls in maybe an active mode or active standby. So they're redundant firewalls that I'm plugging into the network. And we already have a redundant set of routers to the internet, a redundant set of switches inside. I need to put these routers in the middle. Well, how are we doing the redundancy today? Is it a layer 3 redundancy? Is it layer 2 redundancy? Is it using some type of Cisco proprietary protocols? Is it using some type of standard protocols? Are we implementing it with IPsec? Is there some routing technologies we're going to use? Are we doing the routing from the next generation firewall? Are we replacing an existing set of internet routers? Are we implementing some type of inbound VPN? So as a client level VPN into these devices. And if we are, what type of certificates are we putting on there? And then how do we handle the DHCP and the routing associated with the IP addresses that are only assigned to the people who are using inbound client-based VPN technologies? On top of that, I need a SIM set up to be able to collect all the logs from these devices. The SIM is going to have to create some reports. So there's some technologies and networking pieces we're going to need to get that running. And on top of all that, we've got other things in that firewall that are going to be working with our existing routing. Maybe we're having to take routing that we're taking from the internet, and we need to do route redistribution through the firewall. Oh, of course, on top of that, we need to do network address translation. So there's NAT involved, not only outbound NAT for the users or PAT, what the users are using inside, but we also have services on the inside. So we have inbound static NATs with this as well. So all of those things are security that I just mentioned, but every single one of them is all about networking. There was probably very little security in that set of things I just mentioned. Almost all of that was a networking problem. It was a design and implementation of the network configuration, and there was some security layered on top of that. So my recommendation when somebody wants to go into security, they're interested in security, it's a direction they want to go, one of the things they will find is there are very few entry-level security jobs relative to everything else in IT. But there are some entry-level security jobs, and the Security Operations Center or a security help desk is one of those very few entry-level security jobs. Most everybody is going to be starting as a more generalist in more of a general help desk, moving into networking to get that networking knowledge, to understand switching and routing and protocols and the details of the network, and only then are they making that jump into IT security from there. There may also be some operating system stuff thrown in there as well. But you so rarely start in security because you have to have a very foundational knowledge in networking and in some cases operating systems to be able to even get to that point. So I always tell people, if you ever plan on getting into security, You're going to need networking. Go get your networking knowledge, become an expert on the network side, and that's going to propel you up into the security piece.
Excellent. Thank you. That's great advice, because I have a lot of networking classes, and I needed to know if, I should be focusing. My last real quick question is Linux and Python. For people in IT, security professionals, surprisingly, even though I'm a kind of a caveman and have worked with my hands my whole life, I am pretty decent at basic Linux stuff and Python. Should I be studying that? Should everybody be working on that? Or what do you think about Linux and Python in this industry?
Well, if you had to do any one thing in our industry, if you're on the Linux side or Linux interests you, Python is something extremely valuable to have on your resume, to have as part of your skill set. It is so functional. It gives you the ability not just to do simple automation, but also integrate with these infrastructure devices like firewalls, switches, routers, servers, and kind of bring everything back and be able to manipulate the data and then do something with it. It's a very, very powerful scripting language, and one, regardless of who you are, I think everybody should become more familiar with Python. Now, if you're not on the Linux side necessarily, if you're more on the Microsoft server side, then I might even say put Python off to the side and focus on PowerShell, since most of your life will be in that PowerShell screen and being able to manipulate and work with Windows, which PowerShell does a much better job of than Python does. Not that they don't, but there's just so much more built into PowerShell to give you control of Windows that you just can't do on the Python. Knowing both is your ultimate. Knowing both of those would really give you the 1-2 punch you would be looking for to be able to make anything happen from an automation perspective, and maybe throw in a little bit of the old school Perl or shell scripts on top of that. Those will certainly be valuable. Why do it in Python if you could simply do it in a shell script? But both of those are going to be such valuable skills to have, and you will use those skills throughout your career no matter what you do. You can't necessarily say that about Linux. You can't necessarily say that about Microsoft Windows, but both of those on their own have jobs that will propel you through IT by just knowing everything there is to know about Linux and everything there is to know about these other pieces. So I think all of those are important to know. I think that's where I would focus most people's efforts today. Once you have the automation down, you can do almost anything with these technologies, especially when you start looking at cloud technologies and people wanting to automate the cloud. That's the place to do it.
Thank you very much, Professor. You've answered all my questions. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks, Randy.
Have a nice night.
I appreciate the call. You too. And I appreciate the donation in the chat room as well. More than happy to answer those questions, and I appreciate your support as well. So important for those of you wanting to get into security. I wish there was a way we could just jump into security. Like, I want to start in IT security, there I go. If you look around, though, it's just not quite that practical. There's a set of tiered knowledge we need to know before we can be useful in an IT security role. And that useful part is going into that foundational knowledge of hardware and operating systems, loading up the networking piece on top of that, becoming an expert. I don't just say knowing networking, knowing an expertise in networking, really understanding what's in the packets. And then from there, you can propel that into IT security. I think that's more of the important part of this. I think if you're ever going to be in a situation where you're trying to get into security, it's always going to be a tiered, unless you happen to be in one of these big areas where they have a security operations center and they're hiring people right out of the gate to start in the SOC. That's a pretty viable way to get into security, but you're still going to have to backtrack after that. You're still not done just because you got in that entry-level security position. You're now going to have to go back and learn the operating systems and the networking just so you can move up in that piece of it. That's kind of the approach I've seen when I worked as that next generation firewall systems engineer. I got to go to hundreds and hundreds of companies and talk to their security professionals. That's sort of the standard way to kind of focus on those pieces of it. So that's why I give that approach as well. I think also, by the way, knowing and having a foundational knowledge of networking that doesn't just allow you to do security, it allows you to really do almost anything in IT. It is the piece that nobody knows about. They don't understand, but they need somebody who has a very solid understanding of those pieces to be able to make that happen. So that's before I go to the calls, thanks for holding for so long, caller. Let me go to that in just a moment. A question about identification documents needed for the Network Plus exam. There is a frequently asked questions file or a document on the CompTIA ID policy. Their candidate ID policy is on the CompTIA website. You just look for CompTIA IT policy. If I can bring it up and show it to you on the screen for those of you wondering. There it is. It's not as bad as you might think. You do need a picture ID of some kind, a passport, a driver's license, a military ID, some type of state identification card, alien registration card, local language ID, whatever it is, but it's got a picture on it. And then you need one other secondary ID that does not have a picture on it necessarily. So anything that has a name and signature, that's it. So that's almost anything else in your wallet. It could be a credit card. It could be a library card. It could be anything with your name and a signature, because they want to see your signature. And you're going to sign something, and they want to see and compare those things, at least when you're in a testing center for those pieces. That's what you want to find is the CompTIA candidate ID policy. Search for that. You'll find it just fine on the Google machine. Back to the calls. Let's go to 252. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Professor Messer. This is Chad. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Chad. What's your question?
Okay. Well, just to give some background, and so far, I was Bob in the chat earlier. I just passed my NET exam, and I want to thank you so much. Your videos were so helpful, and anytime I had a question on or questioning myself on a subject, I would just go back and watch your individual videos with the objective, like 2.3. That was great. I can't thank you enough.
Great. Congratulations.
But I guess my question, thank you. My question is I guess moving into a job. So I have some experience being a medical lab tech, but I really didn't want to go that field. I've always had an interest in IT, and like since the age of 14, 15, I've been building computers, messing with them, troubleshooting with family. But it was so hard to try and find information how to move into IT. And now that I know how to do it, some of the things you were saying before, I'm really happy to hear, because I took one of the networking classes. I'm in a master's program right now, and I took a cybersecurity post-bachelor's. So this is some background. And I felt like that wasn't enough. So then I learned about CompTIA, and I've taken the Network Plus, and I'm thinking that, and I'm hoping you can give me some clear advice, because it's hard to go to someone to get some of these things like answered right away. And so I was thinking with the Network Plus, I should go into a help desk, I think, and kind of gain more certifications and study for other places, because I eventually want to be in cybersecurity, and I am working towards that goal. But I guess my main question is I'm scared I don't have the A+. Should I go back and take that? Or do you think I would be able to find a help desk with networking plus?
It's going to be a combination of different variables from a prospective employer. But I would think for most employers that are trying to get people in a particular role, especially entry-level roles, the A+ is just so pervasive. It seems to be everywhere. Everybody wants you to have the A+ if you're going into that help desk role. That may not necessarily be that way. Some employers don't care if someone has a certification. Other employers prefer not having someone who's certified, because I think they feel that they can pay them less, which probably is true because they're not certified. So there may be a business reason for hiring somebody who's not certified, so that they can pay them less and sort of have them learn as they go. The other thing you might also want to mention, and this came up before when there was the mention of I think it was Randy who had experience in the cruise lines, is there may be an overlap there you can take advantage of. If you worked as a medical tech, there is plenty of hospitals that need knowledgeable people on their IT staffs. The same thing if you lived in South Florida, you go to get a job with a cruise line. If you have experience with the cruise lines, there's some benefit to having that on your resume that you might be able to leverage going into this. But I would think most employers are going to be looking for the A+. In most cases, it's a nice thing to have on your resume, but perhaps even more importantly, especially for somebody trying to get into an entry-level position, there's some good knowledge on the A+ that you're going to be able to use when you sit down in that job, whatever it happens to be and whatever the employer is looking for. So that's why we kind of generically say A+ is a good one to have in your pocket, probably for that reason alone, but most employers are going to want you to have it anyway.
Okay. That's some good information, but I guess I don't think it'll be as bad. I guess that's what I was wondering, because I generally have a interest in this, so I feel like I should be able to watch some videos and hopefully go through it. And this is not to discredit anyone who's studying for it hard. It's just something that I've always found interest in, and I think I should be okay. But I currently am a beaker analyst, which is a healthcare system thing, but it's still dealing with lab, and it's not really pure IT. And we do a ticket system, and I've had to troubleshoot printers and or the label printers we have and some of the IP stuff. And I've included that on my resume to show that, I do have some experience, but I was hoping maybe that would kind of patch in through the A+. But I mean, I'd still like to go back and get A+ certified, because I know people talk about the trifecta, and I think that's just a good thing to have personally. Do you agree?
It's good because employers are asking for it. If nobody was asking for the A+, nobody would be getting the A+, even though the content in the A+ certification is quite good. So it works on both levels, which I think is great. And the getting all three of those tend to be a popular set for employers. They like to see A+, Network Plus, Security Plus. It's a good combination for them, and it tends to pop up more often than not. So that's one of those reasons that you might want to consider doing it too. You might also want to look, as I mentioned, at looking at the jobs in your area, see if that's what people are asking for. If nobody's asking for Security Plus and you look through 25 jobs and it never comes up, well, maybe now you get to make a decision on whether you really should be doing Security Plus or not. Those are the things that I think should help direct you, is not necessarily what you find interesting, although that certainly helps, but you got to temper that with what do employers want to see out of me, and maybe that can help direct you a little bit in your interests and figure out one that's a dual sides of that. Not only are you interested in it, but employers would like you to have it. Well, that's a good combo. Let's go with that one.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And I also want to, and this will be my last thing. I also want to thank you for saying, mentioning about stories in interviews, because I took a networking class through my program, and that's what really got me interested in networking. And I got to mess with the Cisco packet tracer. We had assignments where we had to set it up and make sure the IP stuff were assigned correctly statically, and we had to set up a DHCP configuration. So I'll definitely mention that if I ever get a job interview. So thank you for that. That's good advice.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Put it on your list. Best of luck, Chad.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
That's something, and I don't think I mentioned it enough on this particular study group, but having the stories during your interview becomes so important. You're the one who should be talking during the interview, not the person who's doing the interview. So having those stories as something that you could say, well, here's an example of something I did, and you can tell the story of, here's what we set up, it didn't work. Having the story have something break or have something down or have something not operating as you would expect is an important part of this. And explaining how you were able to make it work, the resources you used and how you were able to make that happen, is what the person interviewing wants to hear from you. We were talking earlier also, a previous caller, we were talking about knowing networking as being kind of a prerequisite to security. And just to add on top of that, since we're talking about interviews, one of the things that we would start off when we were interviewing other people for systems engineering roles within the Next Generation Firewall company is we would ask, tell me everything you know about ARP. That's clearly a network layer protocol. It's a network level type conversation that we're having. And we want to know about ARP, and we want to know about proxy ARP. What about reverse ARP? You ever see that? Where would you have seen that? And kind of break down all the different ARPs and when you would use them and how they would be seen and how they would be used. That clearly a networking question. There's no security in that. There's not very little security relating to ARP. Talk about gratuitous ARPs. When would you see those and how would they be used? And where's the situation you've used them? So once you start peeling back the onion and talking about the networking piece, you can very often go from there into the security side. That's something I would recommend doing as well. The other thing I'd recommend doing, I've got a video on how to get a job in IT without experience, where I talk about having those stories and I give you examples of labs that you could set up at home that you can use to create more stories. Because that's what you need. You need some fodder. You need something where something is broken or you've seen an attack or something happened or something didn't work and how it got fixed, or something unexpected and where it came from, and you did more research. That's what you would find from that video of how to get an IT job without experience. That's just on my channel, or just search on the Google for how to get an IT job without experience. I also talk in there about formal degrees. I talk about certifications, and I talk about knowing people where you're going to interview, which is often overlooked, and probably one of the most valuable things you can have is knowing people who are there. A couple of questions in the chat room. Anyone's worked help desk, are you able to study coding languages on the side, or are you swamped with tickets and mentally exhausted after work? Well, we're all mentally exhausted after work, but you don't really do coding in IT, at least not programming, not application development. The computer science side of things, those application developers, the programmers, they handle the programming. The only type of coding that you might do or programming that you might do in IT is automation. And for what you're thinking about doing, if the studying of coding languages in that request deals with PowerShell or Python, then that's what you want to do. Anything else, you don't need to be learning Java or C++ or anything else, or any of the, you're not creating a mobile app. You want to automate. You want to make things dance. You want to make things happen automatically. You need to know Python. You need to know PowerShell. It's the Python PowerShell, the PowerShell Python, those two things. Focus on that. Once you have that down, you can spread your wings then. If you really, really are into programming and that's something you would like to do in your off hours, by all means do that. That's certainly something that's interesting. And having formerly done a lot of programming in my past, that's something I really enjoyed. But that's not necessarily going to help you much on the IT side. So that's one of those recommendations that you may want to just temper properly, balance properly with what's going on with your particular environment where you work. That I think is probably the most important part of those things. Well, that brings us to the end, probably of well past another hour in the after show. We just had so many calls coming in. Why stop? We'll just have them all come in. We'll just keep talking about them and keep doing them. Thank you for being here for the first hour of our Q&A. We can't do these study groups without your support and without you here to answer the questions. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for the folks that donated in the chat. We appreciate that too. That does mean a lot for what we're doing here. And every single one of you that participate today, we really do appreciate that. We also have more study groups coming before the month is over. We have a Security Plus study group on Tuesday. I better get to work. Haven't actually written the questions for that one yet. So hopefully I will have questions available for you. Come back on Tuesday and find out. We'll see what happens. We'd love to have you here for our Security Plus study group. And of course, the week after that, we start the whole month over again with A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. And we'll do some more of that. Replays of this are available immediately afterwards. Don't forget to click that button to like and click the button to subscribe. We'd love to have you come back for the next one and get the message on your screen that we're starting up and get those automated messages showing up so that you know exactly when we're going live with these. Thank you for being here. We hope to see you next time. And thanks for joining us on the Network Plus Study Group. Thanks, everyone.